Did you push the
What,
button?
what a great way to start the recording off. Hi, welcome to the tutorial. I forgot the rest of the intro.
Indeed.
Hi, welcome to the tutorial. If you're here to learn something, you're in the wrong place.
Excellent.
You're here to
Today.
Today on the tutorial,
We're talking about Gary Gygax.
We're
and his
talking
wonderful
about-
invention.
we're
Dungeons
talking
and Dragons.
about
Dragon.
the Closet Nerd game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fair.
I don't even I bet you could look it up, but I don't even know how old Dungeons and Dragons is. But I know
Oh,
it's
old.
fucking-
Well, I do because I've been
I
researching the topic.
D&D itself was officially released in 1974, but it was based off of a game that Gygax and a couple of his friends had made a while earlier called Chainmail, which was
Yes.
another tabletop war
And
game.
I will get to that because I have here a brief history of D&D. When I was looking, I was doing some googling, going like, well, what's a brief history of D&D? And Geek and Sundry has a fantastic article that they've written up. It's a 3-part article, written by Ben Riggs.
Of course, Geek and Sundry does.
Yeah.
What
so
was I expecting?
I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read swaths of it, where it just goes over the
Swaths.
the history of D&D, and I'll put a thing in the description so we can properly credit them.
Well, I got an additions time map.
Yeah,
in case you got anything
don't forget to do that in 5 months when you fucking edit this.
Yeah, and then 5 more months when I upload it.
when eventually you get around to making it a video that actually appears on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on that bit.
Right, so you were saying.
So, Dungeons and Dragons is published by Wizards of the Coast in Renton, Washington. Every geek worth our D20 knows that. But it was not always so. Oh, no. Once upon a time...
Hold on,
Dungeons
are
and
you just
Dragons-
straight reading their
Are
article?
you just straight reading it? Just give us the bullet points, bro.
Are we allowed to do that?
As long as we credit them, as far as I know.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you be?
I don't know, it just feels plagiaristic.
It really do.
That's why you credit.
Like plagiarism.
That's why you put. It's just like if you wrote. Oh my god! It's like if you wrote a paper in school.
If you wrote an essay, yeah, and you have to
put. You have to put the credits.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's like if you're talking about like an academic paper, you're like
You
oh,
can't
here's a quote from
copy
their article.
exactly
Not,
what they said.
Here's their whole article.
I can quote them.
Yeah, you get to quote them
that's
and
true.
direct. You get to
How
use direct
big a
quotes.
quote you about to use, though?
I told you
Yeah,
I'm
if
not
you're about
going to
quote
read.
the entire
I
article.
just
like,
said
hold on.
I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read swaths.
Okay. How big are these swaths? Are you reading 40% of it?
Big enough to give you guys some insight on the history of D&D.
He's reading 1%.
I mean, I'm literally looking at a timeline of it, so.
Okay, continue.
Please continue with your plagiarism.
Okay, so Dungeons and Dragons grew out of the fortuitous meeting of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, gamers back in the 60s and 70s, often named for their gaming groups, a bit like acting troops or biker gangs. Gary Gygax, for example, was involved in a group called the Castle and Crusade Society, which we don't really need to go into. The evolution of D&D itself began with Chainmail, which was a game written by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin to simulate medieval combat. However, at the end of the game, there's a 14-page supplement describing the application of the rules to fantasy, which is where the beginning of the rules, the ridiculous rules
That's where the beginning
of
of
D and
Dungeons
D.
and Dragons happened.
Yeah. When Dave Arneson, who's the other aforementioned author of D&D, read the chainmail fantasy rules, he adapted them to a fantasy world of his own creation, Blackmoor, a setting inspired by Lord of the Rings universe
Okay.
combined. What?
See, I've heard of Blackmoor, but I have not heard of Chainmail.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
because
so
it's the oldest version
it
of D&D. It's
it
pre
kind
D&D
of
and
is.
D&D.
Yeah, it's
You'd only really
old.
hear about chainmail if you played D&D enough to hear people talk about the pre-D&D.
Yeah,
Or
and
if
then
you were
you're
like
It's a
interested in the
well-known
history of it, and you didn't
it's a
join in like fifth
well-known
edition of the
fact
fifth edition.
within the D&D community, but outside the D&D community, most people don't know about it.
Yeah, it's one of those like niche bits of history that unless you're involved with the particular bit of ongoing history that comes from, it's not like you can't just go down the road and be like, "Hey, what was the precursor to D&D?" And somebody be like, "Oh, it's chainmail." I mean, you could be like, "Hey, what was the precursor to the NFL?" And I think there was one, but you know, your typical sports fan will probably be able to tell you, and that's most people in the country. But because there's the number of players or otherwise consumers of tabletop games is significantly smaller, it's just not something you'd be expected to know.
Oh, all right, that makes sense.
So the premise was simple. Players would portray only a single character, an idea lifted from a game called Bronstein, and they would explore underground dungeons where they would face perils and puzzles. And both the characters and the story would persist from session to session, with characters working cooperatively and improving over time. So that's where that element of it came from. In the fall of 1972, so ages ago, Arneson drove down to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin from Minneapolis to run Blackmoor for Gary Gygax. Gygax was blown away by the game and within weeks requested the rules from Arneson. He was mailed 18 handwritten pages.
It was mailed.
Yes.
18 handwritten pages.
Yes.
It was a different time, y'all.
Yes.
Yeah,
And here's
we
don't
use
have-
mail anymore.
here's where you really get to see Gygax's
Doesn't really have
penchant
the
for penchant for rules. Gygax took that 18 pages and expanded them to 50 pages.
Jesus Christ.
Calm
and then-
down, Gary.
And then he began
Gary.
testing the game with his children, Ernie and Elise.
Oh,
Gygax.
Gary is the first
You guys
wizard.
are gonna be my guinea pigs.
Fucking Ernie.
Gygax
Yeah,
named the campaign.
Ernest is Gygax's first name. Ernest Gary Gygax.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's just funny because the name Ernie is just funny.
Yeah,
Bert and
because
Ernie.
you associated it with yeah, those guys. Sesame Street. Anyway, continue.
Gygax named the campaign he was
Magical
running
fucking adventure.
Castle Greyhawk, and soon Gary and Dave had confided all their ideas and experiences into a rule set they titled Dungeons and Dragons. It would prove to be a revolution.
Dungeons and Dragons.
And then they go on to talk about how D&D had some issues finding a publisher. So Gygax published it himself. They formed a company named Tactical Studies Rules. To publish the
TSR,
game.
for sure.
Yeah, or
Tactical
TSR.
Studies rules.
Yeah.
My man
Yeah,
said
it's kind of like how
Wow.
we called the LARP Club Medieval Combat Club, even though there was no HEMA involved.
Man
It's just
said,
sort of a
"Fuck
thing
it, I'll do
nerds
it
do.
myself."
D&D sold 150
Yeah, he's straight
copies
Thanos.
in its first month, and by the summer of 1972, or I think it's 1974 at this point, TSR ordered another 1,000 copies.
1974 is when it was officially released.
Yeah, so this would be 1974. For the first years of its existence, the game was difficult to find. Because of that, pirate photocopies of the rules proliferated. The game also, here's a really interesting tidbit, the game also cost $10, which was considered exorbitant amount of money at the time.
Well, I mean,
Wow.
in 1974, for essentially a small for like a magazine, because it's 50 pages, right? Um, yeah, that's pretty expensive.
But it's a game where you use your imagination.
Yeah, but okay, if I went to like a game store and picked up a box of Scrabble today, it'd be somewhere between $8 and $20 depending on where in town I go, and what town I'm in. If I picked up a magazine, it would be $10 today. So imagine if
Which,
I was picking up a magazine
if
and
you
that magazine
calculate
cost me
for
$50.
inflation, that's like
Inflation,
$30 almost.
yeah. So like imagine picking up a copy of Game Informer for $30. Couldn't be me.
Yeah, it would not be me.
That'd be a bit much, yeah.
Yeah.
$40 for Game Informer. Wow.
Yeah.
Suck my
Yeah,
nuts,
that's
Game
that's
Informer.
essentially what you just said with the whole it was $10, which was considered exorbitant at the time. Yeah, at the time, because $10 had a hell of a lot more buying power, unless of course you were looking to pick up D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Which probably is still $10, huh?
No, I
And
think if you
then
buy all the current 5th edition books, it's somewhere around like 150.
Uh,
only
damn.
150.
It's
That's
still a lot.
It might be more than
That's
that. I don't know how many
no,
books
no,
there are.
no,
Just
sir.
thinking off the top of my head.
It's about $500 if you get all of them.
God
It's about 50
damn!
bucks a book, and Kevin's like,
I'll keep to
lashed
my
all
I'll
of
keep
them.
to my
Yeah.
wiki pages. And then
Yeah.
hell no.
The article goes on to talk about how great of a game D&D is, and then basically there's a whole paragraph about how rich Gary Gygax got. Essentially, it
Yes,
says he went from being an
pertinent
unemployed
information.
game designer cobbling shoes to living in a mansion in Beverly Hills. So he was doing pretty well for himself.
Yeah,
Uh,
he was doing very well. He suddenly was like he owned the fantasy genre all of a sudden.
but of course, nothing good lasts forever, right? So
Except for the sweet embrace of death.
not if you believe in
Whoa.
reincarnation.
Also
Or if you believe in
true.
necromancy.
Still true yet.
So, it's a story that isn't all unfamiliar. A small creative company becomes a large corporate entity, and with it becomes boardroom drama. Like
Yeah,
Steve Jobs.
Facebook, Google, Amazon, they all
Yeah.
did it too.
Like Steve Jobs, Gary Gygax was forced out of the company he founded and made successful, TSR. And there were legal battles over the next decade as TSR would attempt to stop Gygax from creating a competing role-playing game. It was undoubtedly a frustrating and painful time for Gygax. Luke Gygax, Gary's son, said his father felt anger and disbelief during this period. And it goes on to
I
talk
wonder if that's where
about...
Pathfinder.
No, actually, I've got that here as well.
Well, let's see. I'm sure you'll get to it in a minute, but it says Gygax died in 2008. I just had to look up when the first Pathfinder was released. 2009, so it was probably published in his memory or made in his memory or something like that. Anyway, continue.
I can't say whether it was or not for sure, but I got a blip about Pathfinder.
Maybe not officially,
So-
but I'm sure whoever did it probably had Gygax in mind.
It goes on to talk about how TSR was without Gygax was a terrible company. They didn't treat their employees very well. They made some business decisions that didn't do well for them. Let me see if I can find. There's a specific spot. They talked about how they tried to make like CD versions of D&D, where it was just like the rules on a CD.
Oh, that's fucking great. I bet it costs like twice as much as the book.
Oh, here we
Yeah,
go.
now it costs
They-
$20.
They found a unique but ultimately unsound method of funding it. Random House, TSR's distributor, paid them for product not when it was sold to bookstores, but when it arrived at Random House's warehouse. Therefore, if TSR shipped a lot of product, Random House would pay them for it. Yes, Random House could return product for a refund, but when sales were good, this wasn't a problem. This money could then be used to finance things like CD-ROM of the D&D rules. The structure would lead to overprinting and TSR failing to pay their printer. Because TSR's debt to their printer eventually became quite substantial, the company signed a contract agreeing to only print books with them. The printer, having a monopoly on TSR's business, began to increase their rates. And somewhere here it says Random House returned millions of dollars of worth of TSR product. Oh boy. Basically, they were fucked because they made some really poor decisions, including getting rid of Gary Gygax. And they just kind of...
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
seems
mean
like that
that's
was
something
cut
that the
down.
boardrooms of major companies do all the time. Like, if they have the power to, they will
Yeah, it's like a
absolutely
coming of
kill the
age
guy
thing
that
for a
made
You can't
company is to
do
kick
this
out
to
their
me.
creator.
You know how much I
Do
sacrificed.
you know how much I sacrificed?
Also,
Yeah.
And the
Um,
reason is
So-
simple because the guy who creates the company might create it to make money, but he also creates it for usually another personal purpose. And then the board is like, we don't give a fuck about your personal purpose. We just care about the money.
and
You
then
could dig deep
also,
into that goes.
I
This is
kind of...
why, kids, you should never get a board of directors. Ever.
I kind of
Own everything
glossed
yourself.
over it, but they did mention that Gygax was still part of the company when the Satanic Panic happened, which is a whole fucking thing.
Yeah. The satanic panic.
Is that why?
We
is that
we
why
lived, the
my
three of
parents-
us, we lived through the very end of that.
I was gonna say, is that why my parents did not allow me to play Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yep, sure is.
Dude, Satanic Panic was some of the dumbest
Well, that was
shit
just
ever.
sort of an established habit at that point. But the reason that the three of us
Couldn't
weren't
watch
allowed to was
Pokemon.
because it
We
was
couldn't watch
the tail end of
anime
the
generally.
because it was satanic.
Because anything anime believes in things like what do they call it?
Reincarnation and other
Not
religions that aren't
Christian
Christianity.
stuff.
Yeah, a lot of
Stuff that isn't
Japanese
part of,
culture, which...
Yeah, non-Christian
Yeah.
theology or just non-theology, which is satanic.
Well, like for example, yokai is translated in English to demon because it's the closest thing we have in English.
But it's
Although I would
actually
argue
closer to
fae.
fairy.
I would say fae
Yeah,
is
I was gonna
perhaps
say
more
fairies
accurate.
are
But like,
closer
yeah,
to
that's the thing though,
yokai.
is they translated it to demon, and because they translated it to demon, then it's like, well, how dare
Funny
you
thing.
watch that show?
I think there actually is a like a homebrew port of most yokai types in 5th edition, which are all fae. They're all fae creatures.
Yeah, well, because that's basically what yokai are. They're the fae. They're just the Japanese version of the fae.
Yeah, it's like it's you see this sandal that got left outside too long and has an angry spirit now. If that doesn't sound like some drunk fucking satyr, I don't know what does.
They like part of
You
like
sound like a satyr.
Celtic, like
That sounds like some fae bullshit to me.
Hey, second, wouldn't it be funny if we put a spirit in the shoe?
And made it mad because it's a shoe.
No, I hardly think it'd have to make it mad. It'd probably just be mad because it was a shoe.
The sheer amount of fae fuckery that you can think of when you're reading
Fae
about like
fuckery.
yokai. Fae fuckery. There's no
Dude,
better way to
they
phrase
did
that.
like nothing other than just commit fuckery constantly.
Oh, yeah.
That's like
Oh, yeah.
the
I didn't
entire
get you
MO of
everywhere.
fae is mass fuckery. In every possible sense of the word.
fuckery will get you everywhere.
Fuckery will get you everywhere.
It will also get you everything, including AIDS.
Yes, sir.
So, things,
Anyway,
things,
so Satanic
were-
Panic.
things were looking kind of down for good old TSR. Not good actually, but
It
old
was good old
TSR.
TSR when Gygax was
But
around.
then, like like Gandalf coming from the east or the west or whatever direction he came
You
from.
could just more easily say like a phoenix rising from the ashes, but calm
Well,
down,
because
Gandalf.
because it's not like that. Like Gandalf arriving to the Battle of Mordor, wizards of the coast appear.
It was actually the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Sure,
There's one
I
thing
don't
I'm nerdy
fucking
about.
know.
It's
I
Tolkien lore.
I have not watched the
Nerd.
Battle of
movies
Helm's Deep?
in a minute. uh,
I'm sad that you only know the story from the movies.
I mean, I have the
Yeah.
books
Read the
and I've
Hobbit.
read the
And
books.
and Leonis is
the
now
Hobbit.
going to start diatribing on the other side of Tolkien fandom.
No, we can talk about Tolkien in
What's you
a
have to
different
read?
We can
You
talk
just
about
didn't
Tolkien
read
in
the
a different
book.
episode. I agree.
But I have read I've read the Hobbit and I've read the Lord of the Rings books, but it's been
The
years.
book other than Hobbit. That's the only one that I read was the Hobbit.
It's been years since I interacted
Well,
with
that was
that
I think the
entire
first one he
world.
wrote anyway.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't remember. I think he wrote Lord of the Rings first, then went back and did Hobbit in a more lighthearted manner. Anyway, we're talking
Well, I
about Harry
know-
Gygax, TSR.
So
I know. Yeah.
there was
yeah,
a
just
company
back
called Five Rings Publishing, which was a gaming company which published, you guessed it, Legend of the Five Rings, which was a card game. And the CEO, a man named I'm gonna apologize for butchering this name, Bob Abramowitz. He heard about the problems at TSR, flew to Lake Geneva to meet with management, and left with a letter giving him an option to buy TSR. Now, at this point, neither Abramowitz nor the Five Rings had enough cash to buy TSR, but Wizards of the Coast did. Oh boy, did they! For anyone who doesn't know who Wizards of the Coast are, they're the people who made Magic the Gathering. And Magic the Gathering has been hella popular since the day it was created. So
I used to play Magic, but I kind of just
Then
it
they
got
ruined
too
it.
complicated.
It's so
I've
goddamn
never,
complicated.
I've
It got
never
too complicated
touched
for
Magic
me.
the Gathering because I look at it and I get an aneurysm. I'm like, that's too much. That's too much.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
And like everyone I know who's like super into the game, it's like, do you have any closet space left? No, you don't, because it's all Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah, it's like the sheer amount of paper you own.
You have like hundreds of thousands
go
of
to bank to
cards, and you
change.
use one fucking deck all the time. Because, oh, this is the best
Yeah.
deck.
Because all the other ones are irrelevant, but you can't be brought to get rid of them.
Yeah.
I
it's
could.
like,
I
I
sold
just-
a bunch of mine.
I
I
just
had
can't.
a whole like big thing of Magic.
That's just
the
why I've
Gathering
never
cards,
been
and I
able to get
sold all
into
of them.
competitive card games at all, because it's like, I don't want to spend that kind of fucking money.
Well, I
and
used to
then
play in Yu-Gi-Oh
It'd
tournaments.
just be irrelevant in like a little while.
I used to play in
So,
Yu-Gi-Oh
unless I was
tournaments, and
making
then
like all my money back and then some, I just wouldn't. I just wouldn't want to be.
I don't remember what year it was. I think it was June of I think 2016 or 2017. Then Yu-Gi-Oh changed the rules like to make pretty much everything that I had completely fucking irrelevant. So I was like, oh great, all right. So I'm just not gonna play this game anymore. And a large portion of the fucking like people who had been playing it up to that point just decided that it wasn't worth it anymore because the new rules were too retarded and like difficult to learn when you've gotten so used to the game being played the same way for 30 years. Or not 30 years, but you know, since the fucking 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 30 years.
So almost
Well,
30
actually,
years.
I mean, it's
It
pretty
is
close
now
to
probably 30 years, but
in
at that point it wasn't.
2021.
It was like, I think at that point it was only like 26 years, 25 or 26 years, but still, when the game's been played the same way for that long, and then all of a sudden they fucking change the rules to the point that everything else is like irrelevant, then yeah, no, that's no thanks.
Well, see, they don't even do it right because, like, D&D has done shit like that to some degree, but when they didn't make the old stuff
Ooh, buddy,
unplayable.
are we going to talk about 4th edition?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
I'd
was gonna
actually
say
really
like, because
rather
you think
not
about it,
talk
like
about 4th edition.
there's 5 editions, 5 full editions, and then you also have 3.5, which I believe is just 3 with a few minor rule changes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
it's 3 with rule changes, but then you also have Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which came out. Dungeons
yeah,
and Dragons. You have Advanced D&D, and then you have Advanced D&D 2, which
What are these
AD&D
Game Boy
came
games?
out
What the fuck?
after D&D. What?
Are these Game Boy games? What the fuck?
nope,
No. 1974 Dungeons and Dragons. 1977 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons Basic.
yeah. And I don't think
Then it
there's a
was an
specifically
advanced.
marked. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a specifically marked second edition of Dungeons and Dragons. I think that was AD&D.
I think second edition is AD&D second edition. I'm pretty sure because third is not too terribly different. But there's like between 1977 to 1994, it's a little strange because you have like the Dungeons and Dragons basic set, the companion set, the master set, the immortal set. And at the same time, you're also having like the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, Player's Handbook. Well, okay, not at the same time. Those were a little farther apart. But yeah, there was box sets coming out for D&D while Advanced D&D was being released.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically,
I think
Advanced
they went
D&D
through
second edition.
versions a lot faster back in the day too, but once they hit
Oh
3.5,
no, they definitely are going through editions faster
They
now.
went through editions
It's like-
faster post 2000s. Yeah, because it was like
It
oh,
was
that's
it was
cool.
3 years between OG D&D and AD&D, but then from the release of AD&D to AD&D second was like 10 years. I think it was actually like 11 years. But then the difference between third edition and 3.5 was 2000 to 2003. Between 3.5 to 8 was or to fourth was 2003 to 2008. Then between fourth to fifth was 2008 to
2008 to
2014.
2014. Yeah.
And then we're probably looking at like the cusp of a 5.5 now that Tasha's came out, and a couple other books. I'm pretty sure by 2022 they're going to at least announce a 5.5, if not just an outright 6e.
Yeah.
Because
Maybe.
they've changed with some of their latest books. They've like just totally rewritten some rules, and when you start doing that with D&D, that sounds like another edition is coming.
Hmm, possibly. I feel like 5e will last a while though.
Well, yeah,
Mhm.
everybody did when it came out, but
I mean,
it's
it.
lasted a while for
Mind you,
D&D.
Dave, it was out in 2014, and it's now 2022,
Yeah.
so it has lasted a
Well,
while.
it's currently 2021, which means D&D has been out for 7 years. So it's, as far as the 2000s go, it's roughly about time for a new D&D.
Not that I'm in a rush for a new one, but
No, I mean I don't really care. Like I'll go back to 3.5 still. Like I don't give a shit.
5e is the only one I know
I'll
right
play
now,
the
but
one that's the most fun right now. That's the one that I'll play.
well, okay. So can I ask a question regarding editions then?
mhm.
Which is, as I understood it, the editions kind of like expand the world, universe, and story of D&D. Like older editions took place in different areas and told different parts of the story of the universe.
We're
So
like
like
set farther along in the past.
so
So
5e, like there's certain things that have happened already. By the time 5e's books talking about the various stories are around. So for example, I was reading Volo's Guide to Monsters this week, and they talk about the goblinoids used to have way back in the day. So that's goblins, bugbears, and hobgoblins. They used to have all their own, like they were normal people with their own gods. And then this one god came traipsing through and conquered and murdered every god in the goblinoid in all the goblinoid pantheons that didn't bow to him.
Which I
And
want to
so
say is the
now
keyboard.
the goblins only have this one god who is just the god of making people suffer the bugbears have two gods, which are just hate each other pretty much, and the hobgoblins only have one god, which is like the god of conquest and honor, which is why those races do the things they do.
So basically, the way it works, from my understanding, is as these versions are put out, people will add lore to it, like non canonically. People add lore to it through their own games and whatnot, and some of those bits of lore become popular enough that in the next edition they become canon. So you get an expansion of the rules and an expansion of the lore. So like with what Critical Role's doing, their whole Exandria Tales, they have an official D&D book now, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which has become like a canon.
That's now official content.
Yeah, that's like now a canon
It's
lore
published
thing.
by Wizard.
Mhm.
You know, I
Yes,
just
that's
realized
what I
saying that out of context.
Kevin has.
Yeah, this was published by
Explorer's Guide to
Wizards.
Wildmount.
God,
This is
saying
published
that I
by
know what it
Wizards.
means. Yeah, saying that I know what I'm referring to is Wizards of the Coast, but like, imagine just saying that to some random person on the street. Yeah, here's a product that was published by Wizards.
Here's a product that was published by Wizards.
I could imagine you say that to one of these like aliens guys, and then they look at you and go,
they'd be
"And
like,
I was crazy."
your typical Southerner would be like, "You mean like the Klan? What are you talking about?"
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
Having ailments, friend? Here, take this. It was published by Wizards.
Take this
Actually, let's be honest. Let's be honest.
Published by Wizards.
The aliens guy would just find an excuse to tell you your wizards are actually aliens.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
Right,
actually,
we're mixing memes that were never meant to be mixed now.
Okay, all right. So
if you've watched London's Wizards versus Aliens television show, you'll know that that's not something that should ever be brushed.
That is a hot mess right there.
I have not, but I have seen the movie Cowboys versus Aliens.
It's better than Wizards.
That's better than Wizards versus Aliens. Really,
because at least Cowboys versus Aliens did him the justice of giving him a fucking megabuster.
Yeah, pretty much. That was a
Wizards versus Aliens is just bad UK youth.
It's just like, what if you took the fucking villains from Power Rangers and tried to put them in the Harry Potter world?
Oh my god!
Pretty much like that.
It's about
Only
that
written by
bad,
people
bro.
who don't understand Power Rangers or Harry Potter.
Holy
Yeah,
shit!
yeah, it's about that bad.
Holy shit!
It's like a shitty British Power Rangers that thinks it's Doctor Who.
Wow.
It's
like
not great. It's not great.
Can we please go back to Dungeons and Dragons? Because
Yeah.
I feel like
So
there's more
You know, like
to-
well-established fantasy that has like some sense of.
to get back on
there's
track
some
a little
substance
bit.
to it.
So this guy Abramowitz, who is the CEO of Five Rings Publishing, he approached Peter Adkinson, who's the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, and basically said, "Hey, I'll give you this writ of sale. Basically, I'll let you buy TSR as long as you agree to also buy Five Rings Publishing." And of course, Peter Adkinson, who at this point is balling in money and loves D&D, is like, "Well, yeah, you got it,
Just
bro."
rips a line of cocaine. He's like, "Fuck it, let's do it."
He's like, "Fucking let's go, bro." So of course he immediately bought both of the companies. Well, I say immediately, but you know how company buying goes.
CEO just rips a line of cocaine.
Don't know how company buying goes. I don't have a fucking clue.
You don't know how buying
takes
it takes a long time. There's a lot of paperwork and like proceedings you have to go through.
I never had no type of company knowledge, but
That's because you've never had a job, loser.
that's not true. I had a job for 8 months.
Well, Yes. I'll be
Yeah,
right
I know.
back.
I'm just making fun of him. Uh, so uh, Peter Adkinson and future Paizo, which is an important name we'll get to later. CEO Lisa Stevens flew to Lake Geneva and spent the summer of 1997. That's where we're at now, managing the company's transition from TSR to Wizards. So basically, from there, it's just a lot of, um, essentially, it's most of the rest of this section of the article talks about how the people transitioning from TSR to Wizards were like, oh, this workplace is so much better. Like, they're very open with their numbers and stuff. Management isn't like, holed up in the office and doesn't interact with the peons, as they put it. They basically say like, they're out in the middle of the shit with the rest of their employees, and they're just like, yo, you guys want pizza? Let's go. Uh, like,
Easiest way to a man's heart: feed his ass at work.
yeah, they were like, they
He
basically
will be loyal.
they basically said like when they joined Wizards, they felt like they were valued people, and they weren't treated like just workhorses, kind of like modern
That's kind of a
corporations these
sad
days.
thing
But
that a lot of like small businesses that get bigger do. Is
yeah,
as you make more money, the people running the show just they're like, oh, I bet I could make even more money and
hmm
even more money. I want to be rich. And
and that
then,
was
somewhere along the line, they forget some of the basic tenets of how they're supposed to like treat their subordinates and whatnot, and you end up at this place where money becomes king and the subordinates become as close to slaves as the leader can make them.
yeah, and they
Wage slaves.
the statement that Wizards made was they were saying that they wanted to prove that like, hey, we're a company made by nerds that's run by nerds and we make nerd shit. We're not all that serious about like gotta make money. And they're doing
Yes.
really well.
Please
Um,
ignore our multi-million-dollar card franchise.
yeah, well, that's a nerd thing made by nerds for nerds, and it did really well.
Yes. And totally never had anything done to it for the purpose of money.
It probably did, but
Sure
like
did.
here,
Oh,
You're
it
not
sure
going to
did.
find something that doesn't.
here's a good paragraph I think that sums up how Wizards treated them versus how TSR treated them. So it says Atkinson offered jobs at Wizards to the vast majority of the TSR staff. To make the transition to Seattle easier, Wizards flew TSR staff to Seattle for house hunting weekends. They paid for movers, and they even helped new employees that got caught paying rent on apartments in both Lake Geneva and Seattle. One TSR employee said the Wizards was doing everything but putting them on their backs and carrying them to help them with the move to Seattle. That's like, ain't no company do that
That's
shit.
pretty good. That is pretty dope. One thing, like, man, that's one of those things I know, like, just thinking about having to move to like another place like that. There's definitely like something to be said about what's the word I'm looking for? Like just um a lot of the times people just like they don't like you're uprooting a family and taking it somewhere else, and like you
Yeah.
have to deal with a lot of problems. Like one of the issues that you can live or you can be dealing with is like you have to take your kids away from all their friends and move them halfway across the country, and they don't know anybody here. And like it's pretty common for the kids to be like, "Yeah, how dare you?" But it's like, "Yo, like I have to work, man.
Yeah.
Like we
And
gotta make money."
they don't understand that at that age, but as they get older, they'll get it.
No. Yeah, yeah. And that's why you have a lot of people who are just like they don't want it's why you don't want to do it, but like when it's your option, you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Um
So,
definitely is a rough place to be.
The next
moving.
bit talks about it's because like you said, you gotta just kind of move a whole family places. And it sucks.
I'm sure some of those people were like just single folks or whatever, and they're like, yeah,
probably.
whatever, I can move.
Yeah,
But
when
like
you don't got nothing else going on, it's not that big a deal.
But when you got kids or a wife or something, and they're like, but I don't want to leave all the shit I have here,
Mm-hmm.
is really where it starts becoming a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the
Anyway,
next bit talks about them reaching out to Gary Gygax, basically. So it says, as the new owner of Dungeons and Dragons, Peter Atkinson set out to make things right with Gary Gygax, the co-creator of D&D, who had nearly been sued into oblivion by the prior management of TSR. Atkinson, instead of suing Gygax, said he wrote checks to Gary Gygax's ex-wife and Dave Arneson in exchange for a clean bill of health on the intellectual property of Dungeons and Dragons, which is a great thing to do for Atkinson. Is a complete flip in Gygax's treatment. But why? Atkinson recalled, perhaps this wasn't strictly necessary, but there were many hard feelings among old school gamers that Gary and Dave had both been cheated. So, Atkinson's sense of justice would pay dividends. Luke Gygax, Gary's son, who runs GaryCon, a convention in Lake Geneva devoted to honoring the memory of his late father. If D&D had to move outside of my family's control, Peter was a great person to assume the mantle. The payments also made it clear that Wizards of the Coast and no one else had claim to the intellectual property of Dungeons and Dragons, which would help Wizards later in its own sale to Hasbro. So basically, and it also has a little paragraph about Gygax writing Return to the Tomb of Horrors before he passed away.
writing what?
It's an intro D&D adventure called Return to the Tomb of Horrors.
Oh, you know what? I've heard about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's a thing that exists.
So basically, they mended things with Gary Gygax before he passed
See,
away.
that was smart though, because you probably had a whole fucking fan
Yeah.
group setup that was like really angry about what happened to Gary Gygax.
Yeah.
And now all of those people are appeased and you have nothing impeding you. Like everyone
Mhm.
approves of you having the thing that
They're
got
like,
quote
they're like,
unquote
oh,
stolen.
you mean business? You're like, hey, we know you got shafted, so we're here to help you. And all those fans that feel like he got shafted are like, okay, they're doing the right thing, and that puts
Yeah, they
that'll
feel
they feel
what's the
justified.
word? Like yeah, they feel justified. And that's a big deal too, because like you take for example how I feel about Halo, where I'm aware that the newer what's the word I'm looking for, um like the newer Halo content, and I'm aware that it was made using like notes from Bungie on what they wanted to do, but there's definitely a sense of like, and I think for me personally, it's largely because 343 says, "You are the child of my creators. You are Forerunner." And then in 343's story, the Forerunners are an entirely different race that hated humanity and couldn't forgive, and at least the Didact couldn't forgive them for the fact that they conquered a bunch of shit while they were trying to run away from the flood. And it feels that's not how the story should be to me. And then if someone were to do like they did with Gary Gygax and like smooth things over and fix that, I would feel like so justified in everything that I thought before. And I'd be like, hell yeah, I was right all along. And then I'd be right back down to like play Halo again and all of
Mhm.
343's games. So it's a really, really like smart move. It's a move Destiny could certainly use right about now.
It's just getting worse and worse at this point. Like,
But anyway, it's also like not a move you have a lot of opportunities to make. So like right now, just because of all the stuff that's happened, the situation with what do they call it with Halo isn't like the situation with Gary Gygax.
No, it's
You can't
a little
just
bit more
you can't
complicated.
just like help out a specific dude and convince the entire community that you're a good guy now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a smart move on their part. I think there's probably a large enough amount of the fandom that was really upset with the way Gygax was treated. So,
hmm So
and
the
that's a
next,
name everyone knows in D&D
yeah,
even today.
yeah, which is it's a little bit of a shame because you hear Gary Gygax a lot more than you hear Dave Arneson, but they were co-creators. Most of the time, you just hear about Gygax. Probably because his name is fucking Gygax. Like, what kind of a name is that?
I
It's
I
dope.
wouldn't say everybody. Well, it sounds like the name of a wizard in the game, but I wouldn't say everybody knows because like there's a lot of people who have joined over the last couple, just the last like three couple of years, who don't know who
Well,
Gygax is.
yeah. I mean, a lot of people when they're new to D&D, the only reason I knew about Gygax getting into D&D was because I watched the Crap Guide by Joe Cat, and there's a point where he says something like, "If you roll all these dice and you still cannot make your save or something, you must have done something to offend the ghost of Gary Gygax. Like you used weighted dice or something." And I was like, "Is that somebody important to D&D?" And then I looked him up. Like, oh well, he's the guy who made it, I guess.
hmm
That is an
So
interesting name.
so the next bit talks about how they created third edition,
Are we just gonna
which
sit here and
is
read this article for 2 hours?
no, it's almost at the end, and then I'll open the floor to you guys to talk about whatever the fuck you want.
Okay.
So they made third edition, which they released at Gen Con in 1999.
Ah, simpler
Or
times.
they announced it at Gen Con in 1999. And the idea of third edition was basically to simplify all the shit from first edition and from advanced D&D and all of that. Is basically to simplify it. That's where they created, or that's where they really honed in on the 6 core statistics and all of that. And they made it.
That wasn't
They
like
essentially
super
made it.
solidified till 3.
That wasn't super solidified until 3. No. And even then, in 3.5, that was a little. Yeah, but they made it accessible, a lot more accessible to a larger audience at the time. Is basically what they did with third edition.
Interesting.
The game, when released in 2000, proved to be a great success. Fans saw that Wizards understood and loved D&D, and the game, third edition, mind you, designed by Monty Cook, Skip Williams, and Jonathan Tweet, is still played by gamers today, although the back of the book might not say D&D third edition. And then they made a power move. They made a ballsy power move, which you would have thought would have been bad for their checkbook, but in fact has been very good for them. So Wizards of the Coast created something called the Open Gaming License, which basically says,
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah,
It gives people the right to like make D&D content.
yeah. It says, here's our rule set. Go ham. Basically.
Well, the thing is, if you actually read that open gaming license, anyone can make the games, but for it to be considered official D&D content, it still has to get published through
It
Wizards.
does have to get published through Wizards, yes.
And this is where things like Homebrew and Unearthed Arcana come in.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, like, for example, Unearthed Arcana had something called Elemental Spell, which was an unofficial thing where you could use meta magic as a sorcerer to change a spell and alter its element to do a different type of damage. and that was really good. So they added it into the game as transmuted spell is what it's called now.
Yeah. So basically, they mentioned that some people were a little bit scared of the OGL because TSR. Yeah, I know all these terms might get a little confusing. TSR would basically sue you at the drop of a hat if you did anything anywhere near Dungeons and Dragons. But this is Wizards of the Coast now,
And
they're
now it's called
doing
transmuted spell.
and they're doing cool things. Yes, thanks for that, Zeta. They're doing cool things, and they're allowing other people to make more games. There's a paragraph here that says the open gaming license would be like J.K. Rowling making the Harry Potterverse public domain. The OGL allowed other companies to use D&D to make money off of the intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast. It sounds like this should have been a disaster for Wizards and their bottom line, but there was solid reasoning behind the move. Other publishers would make adventures for D&D, and these other publishers would become de facto ambassadors of the game. All of their publications would drive new fans to Wizards to buy the core books. And boy, has that worked fucking fantastically.
In other words, they really did make a ballsy move. They made
I also
like a
I also want to
189
mention along.
IQ, like, guys, I bet if we did X, it would result in Y. And then
I'm not gonna like just simp Wizards of the Coast, but I do also want to say like they pulled the absolute most baller move, and during I can't remember if it was during third edition or if it was in response to the poor perception of fourth edition, but Wizards actually published D&D's own competitor, which is Pathfinder. Is also published by Wizards of the Coast.
wow.
Like that's such a
God,
imagine if Coke and Pepsi were owned by the same company. Like that's such a baller move.
Because Peter Atkinson is like, wow, you're crazy. I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah, like I said, reps a line of cocaine. Woo! He's got that Charlie
We'll do it
Sheen
live.
kind of energy.
But yeah, the open gaming license gave birth to things like Call of Cthulhu, Pathfinder, Starfinder, and 13th Age. And there's a blip here about Pathfinder. There's a part where they say some people feel like the newer editions of D&D, like 4th edition, got away from the point a little bit. So there's a company called Paizo. It is the maker of the most popular flavor of 3rd edition D&D. Their most popular product is Pathfinder, an evolution of the 3.5 rule set. Mind you, this is created by Paizo and published by Wizards. To those who see the OGL as a bad move for Wizards, the very existence of Paizo is their major piece of evidence. Yeah, and then basically it basically goes on to say that once 4th edition was released, some people got salty about it, and that's when they made Pathfinder. And then I think August of 2017, because the article says just this August, but the article's from 2017. Says they released Starfinder, which is a 3rd edition inspired rule set of space fantasy, which I would actually kind of love to play.
Yes, and it failed epically, actually.
I kind of would love to play that.
One thing that D&D is notorious for is that it doesn't really suit itself to sci-fi very well, which sucks because I'd love to see sci-fi variations of D&D more often, but every time they try to do it, it falls flat.
Meanwhile, there is actually there's a couple of Star Wars games that are, I wouldn't necessarily, I call them D&D adjacent. They use they use a little bit different dice. They use like fate dice and stuff. And they're actually pretty good.
Dice.
Yeah, see, yeah. that's
I
a
don't
little
know what
beyond
that is.
that's a little beyond your brain, I think.
Okay, but here's the thing. So like you can call dice whatever you want. Dice are dice.
Yeah, so fate
Right?
dice, fate dice are little fate dice. I think they're 4-sided or 6-sided dice that just have pluses and minuses on them.
Okay, so yeah, that's equivalent to a what do they call it? Like two-sided die, basically.
Or like a coin
Or
flip.
like a coin flip.
A two-sided dice
No,
coin.
no, it's not. No, it is not. It's used for
Okay,
a whole
if we're
different
talking
thing.
like, if we're talking about physically two-sided, it's a coin.
It's yeah.
But basically,
Yeah, fair.
they just kind of help you do epic shit in fate-based games. But the fate system is a little tricky and complicated. But yeah, anyway, that's the end of my that's the end of the article. Again, this was written by Ben Riggs. It's from Geek and Sundry. I'll link it in the description so you can have a read of. It's in 3 parts, but I'll link all of them so you can have a read of it for more detail if you want to look into that. But it's very well written, and it is very good abbreviated history of D&D. So
Nice.
I guess now the question would be, how did y'all get into D&D, and what's been your experience?
didn't.
Except for Ringo, because he just
Except
like
for Ringo, because he
for
don't.
some reason
don't know.
Ringo's like, I will be a part of any other nerd thing, but D&D is just too far nerdy for me.
No, I'm just not interested. It's literally I just am not interested. I'm not a fan of tabletop games in
I
general.
can't blame you for that, because I mean,
I love
to be
Gene Forge,
honest,
but I
if
hate
it wasn't-
D&D.
if it wasn't
It's
for
so
like
different because it's a video
of
game
my-
versus a tabletop game.
some of my friends hadn't like got me into D&D directly, I probably wouldn't have, because Warhammer 40K was my introduction to tabletops, and god damn is it a pain in the ass. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, I
There's
tried
so much
to.
shit you
This
have.
sounds like heresy against the Imperium of Man.
I tried
Fucking
to.
call it heresy. I don't care. The truth is
I
the truth.
tried to get into Warhammer, and oh boy, it's a lot.
It is
It's
a
such
lot.
it's quite the
intentionally
undertaking.
the most intense thing you've ever seen.
Yeah. And I've seen
Yeah,
Tent City.
it's yeah, man. It is a lot. That's all I can say. But D&D is much more manageable as like a direct thing to do, as like a pastime. There's just like the rules are a lot more simplistic. They make a lot more sense. At least I've only ever played 5e. I've never played 3.5. So I
I've
know
played-
I've
Pathfinder.
played
Horus
3.5.
Heresy.
Fifth edition is much simpler than
Mhm.
any previous edition, and there's going to be some people who are like, "Oh no, 3.5 is perfectly simple, and 5e is needlessly complex." No, 5e is intentionally very simplistic, so it's easy to get into. That doesn't mean it's the best, but it's the easiest to get into because of how simple it is.
Mhm.
I was gonna say my favorite little
That way on
factoid about
purpose, yeah.
D&D, or at least D&D adjacent, because I think it might be Pathfinder that does this, is that a succubus is a creature of pure lust, and therefore, if you refuse their advances, you deal psychic damage to them.
That's
Which I
lit.
think is the funniest shit ever.
Like, nah, I'm good. I'm not horny today.
Yeah.
Feels
I'm
like
pretty
the
sure
end.
that's Pathfinder.
But even then, we just said that Pathfinder is based off D&D 3.5.
Yeah,
so.
it basically Pathfinder First Edition is basically 3.5. They're very similar.
Mhm. There's a
If
little
you look at
bit
the character
more.
sheet for 3.5 and Pathfinder First Edition, they look very similar.
There's
It's
a little
a
bit more
lot of the same.
complicated rules, but it's essentially. the
Yeah,
same.
but they're still very similar.
Yeah. I am curious to know how Zeta, I had to try to remember that name, got into D&D.
I felt you struggling. How
Yeah.
I got into D&D?
Yeah.
Well, like every good Christian homeschooled boy, I was going to community college after getting my diploma. And at this particular college, I was currently the sitting president of the film club, and so we would do like film history stuff. We'd go watch like new films together. Some of us made films, like student films. That when I joined was the primary function of the club, but because that particular college did not like previous members of the club, it was really hard to communicate with them. And coming in as the new head of that club, it had its own bunch of issues. So I sort of remodeled the club. Anyway, as being sort of like secondary Stugo because you're the head of one of the clubs, it's sort of mandatory that you get along with the heads of other clubs, or at least on a professional level. So I was hanging out with some of the Stugo members, and this college also had anime club, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Oh, my high school had anime club.
Yeah, that
And
that
I
it
was.
was
like
in-
the worst
They,
nerd.
they were all very sweet, but
I
they
was
were
in
also
that
all
anime
very
club.
cringe.
I was in that anime club.
Well,
There
I'm
were
pretty sure
some
by the
nice
time you
people.
joined that anime club, most of the people that I'm talking about had graduated.
Maybe.
But
Probably.
because there
My
was a
issue
couple
with
people that I went
anime
to high
clubs
school with that ended up
generally.
in that club. Anyway, so I was sitting with them one day, and I noticed they were playing a tabletop game, and I was like, "Well, this is an anime, so what is this? Tell me about what you're doing." And they're like, "Oh, this is Dungeons and Dragons." And at the time, I was like, oh, "Okay, here we go." Um, but at the same time, I'm also sitting in
Nerd.
my head thinking, I'm a musical theater actor. I really don't have any right to complain about anybody being a nerd because, like, if you've ever been around theater nerds,
Oh my
that's some
god.
fucking
Yeah.
nerds.
Yeah. It's like almost as bad as band kids.
No, it's worse.
It's worse.
It's definitely
It's
worse.
much worse.
It's so much worse.
I love how everyone immediately agreed on that with no questions asked.
I'm telling you this as a
It's
theater
so
student.
much
I've been
worse.
up in
Theater
there,
students are
man.
simultaneously the best and the worst.
Yeah.
So anyway, they were like, "Oh, well, it's Dungeons and Dragons," and I was like, "Okay, I've heard of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, what? Tell me about like what's going on the sheet because they weren't playing yet. They were just like getting ready to play. So I was like, "Tell me about like, well, what is? I see there's a lot of things on that sheet. So what are you doing?" And so somewhere in the conversation, they explained to me that it was edition 3.5, and I was like, "Wouldn't that just be fourth?" And they were all immediately like, "No, nobody wants to play fourth." And I was like, "Okay, what is the depth lore of this game? What are you talking about?"
Are we talking? Were you
Um,
asking like about real life lore, like why all of
yeah, I was
why
like,
fourth was like?
what's the like why did this happen? Like why is everybody so turned off by fourth edition? Like what are you talking about? So I got the quick rundown of how third and 3.5 was better than fourth because fourth was just super convoluted, yada yada. So I stuck around to watch them play, and I came to the realization because since, as we mentioned earlier, myself and Leonis and maybe Beard, I wasn't really self aware much at the time, got to see the end of the Satanic Panic, which my parents bought into. Uh, the only exposure I had to Dungeons and Dragons is a bunch of like cringy, sweaty neckbeard, like incel types sitting in a basement and begging magic powers to give them a girlfriend. That's
Yeah,
essentially the image I had.
that's kind
That's
of how
essentially
they
the image I
portrayed
had
it
for
to
D&D
us.
play.
Perception
Yeah.
to see if there are any hot MILFs.
Yeah, basically. I would like to make a perception check test for hot minutes. Anyway, um, yeah. So I sat there and I watched them play. And I'm sitting there going like, "This is literally just improv acting." I was like, I could use since there were no open spaces on the improv troupe, and that was its own set of
can use my passion for theater here.
yeah, basically. Only I didn't sound like a Karen. I don't know how you managed to nail the Karen accent just there, but yeah.
I
was
want
just
to
like,
talk
oh
to
shit,
your
I can do that.
manager.
So I played 3.5
accent.
with them, and then when I went on to a full university, I found another group that was playing 3.5 and fourth edition, and I got to sit on fourth edition. I was like, I've literally only heard bad things about fourth edition, so we'll see. And after sitting in on fourth edition, I decided I never wanted to play it because I was sitting there thinking, this is actually since we're mentioning D&D YouTubers, I had the exact same thought of Puffin Forest. I was looking around this room as the spectator, watching this like incredibly boring, just like oh, this happens, just that, and I was like, this is what I've decided to do with my Saturday afternoon. I chose this.
Uh,
This was a mistake.
yeah, yeah, that seems to be the consensus when it comes to
Fourth edition.
D&D 4th edition.
But fifth edition came out the same year that I went to university. But people who were like really swearing by 3.5 were sort of hesitant to try it. But the group that I was with eventually tried it, and I was like, "Oh, this is way easier. This is like, you know, I can fill out the entire character sheet in like 10 minutes and then just never look at it again because I know what my things are. I don't have to constantly be like, okay, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that." And there was like the boons work differently. Um, Classes, I
Boons.
don't want to say are more organized. Yeah, well, I mean, for instance, boons. Well, that yeah, because you entered in fifth edition, so it's difficult to explain boons to you without you having either played epic level fifth edition or having just played 3.5. So anybody who's listening to this and is continuing to listen this far in probably has played some edition of D&D. So I would suggest if you haven't played 3.5, play it at least once. That's what I started with. It's great. I played Pathfinder first edition. I prefer 3.5, but Pathfinder's still pretty cool as well. However, I will say I've had the most fun playing fifth edition because it is the most accessible, so you get a wider variety of people, and it's easier to homebrew for fifth edition because it's simple. There's a couple like nitpicks that I have, like there's no. Okay, so in Final Fantasy, if you're playing a Final Fantasy game, if you throw a health potion at an undead, it hurts them because they're powered by like negative energy. So if you hit them with like the positive energy of healing, it hurts them. Or alternatively, if you hit them with dark magic, then they heal. It's the same way in 3.5. If you hit an undead with healing magic, it hurts them a lot. Don't have that in 3.5. There's no negative energy that runs undead. It's just necrotic damage, which is like um, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like necrosis and death magic, and it's just sort of like a couple things rolled up into one. But yeah, so that's my story. How I started playing D&D was as I decided not to judge the sweet innocent anime club people because I was a musical theater nerd. So despite the fact that I had been something of a bully to these people in high school, I was like, yeah, but I'm a theater nerd now, so I really have no room to talk.
I see. I was a theater nerd in high school, and I was still bullying those kids.
Wow, what an asshole.
I was like a soft bully. It was the soft bully of omission where it was just like I had clout, people wanted to be around me, and I didn't want to be around them because I just found them cringy. So that affected the way that other people treated them. I did nothing to curb that at all. I wasn't like, "Hey guys, live or let live." I was just quietly laughing at their misfortune.
Wow. Rude.
What an
I,
asshole.
I
Yeah.
laugh out loud at people's misfortune.
Well, I mean, if I could be
It
blunt,
makes people
we
not
all
like
knew
me.
you
I
were a
really don't
dick,
give a
though.
shit. Yeah, to be fair.
Yeah, you
And
sort of
also,
We,
doubled
we,
down
we've
on
I
known
my.
you were a
don't,
dick from day one.
I don't care if people don't like me because of like things that I do or say. So to me, it makes no difference. You know what I mean?
So what you're
Yeah,
saying is
I
you're
know
not
you're a
bullying them
dick.
because they're anime cringe. You're just bullying them because they're cringe.
Just bullying them because I can.
Well, see, that's yeah. No, I'm not down with that. Anyway, Dungeons and Dragons.
Because I
Yeah.
want to. How about
So
that?
I don't know if I got Beard into it. I got Leonis to play it because at some
no,
point during
I got into it on
early
my
before
own.
quarantine.
I could tell that story how I got into it. Uh I think
I am spoiled because our 3.5 DM handled armor class a lot differently than has ever been official. It was more like Fallout VAT system. So that was like
What?
my first experience with armor class. It's never been that way since, and I kind of miss it.
So I think the first time I had an experience with D&D was way way back. I think back before. This is how I gauge time. This was back before Terraria 1.0 was released, so it was still
That only works as a measurement of time over the last 10 years.
yeah. This is a while back, and there was this online uh there's this online forum D&D thing called the Island.
I remember this.
Oh yeah, I
I
was
never
on
got
that
directly
sometimes.
involved in the
I
island.
remember.
Yeah,
I started to, and then I just didn't after like.
I started to,
a
and then
week.
like school was a thing, and then and school calmed down. I was like, okay, I'll go back to that, and then work was a thing, and then I just could never find the time to go back to it.
yeah. I forgot
Because I have
how
GM for something similar at one
I
point.
forgot how I got into that, or what specific direction I came from. I think it was because of Terraria. Like I played on a Terraria server.
Yeah, it
and
was on
somebody,
it was a Terraria. It was a Terraria
Server.
Yeah,
like
it started out on a
group.
Terraria forum. I think you
Yeah.
met
The one who shall not be named.
Tentons, and then I can't remember if Tentons introduced you directly to Charmander, or if there was somebody between those two. There was
names that people are like, what?
difference between you.
Yeah, these are people. These are people.
These
I
were
met.
usernames from
Yeah.
the site. Tentons
Yeah.
was
On the
somebody
forum, yeah.
that we played Terraria
Yeah.
with through Steam.
I think that's
And
exactly.
then I want to say it
'cause
was
it
a
was,
moderator on his server who introduced you to Charmander on the forum.
Yeah, it was Tenton's. It was Tenton's server. I know that's how I got. That's how I got. Somehow through the people there, I got introduced to this thing, and it was a 3.5 game. And I was just kind of, I didn't really know what I was doing because I'd never messed with D&D before. Because again, Satanic Panic, ooh, so
Yeah, I don't really remember the Satanic Panic like murking D&D. I remember it murking Pokemon.
Oh, it
I remember it
murked
murking
D&D
practically
hard,
any
bro.
anime.
It murked D&D
Yeah, it
hard.
murked D&D
That was
pretty
like the
goddamn
core.
hard.
That was like the core of it.
The whole image of like people having like an initiation in a basement and everybody's wearing like dark robes and like forces you to play dungeons. That all came
Yeah.
from the Satanic Panic. The whole thing
Yeah,
of like,
yeah.
and they have to do whatever the dungeon master says. That all came from the
Mhm.
Satanic Panic. Because as anyone who's ever DM'd knows, you would pay in blood for your players to do what you say.
Yeah.
That is an accurate statement if
Dysfunctional
I've
group
ever.
of bisexual catastrophes.
Yeah, because more often than not, I hear DMs going, like, covering their face, going, "Why are you like this?"
Yeah.
or just face palming the table,
Yeah.
crying. There's a lot of crying involved with being a DM.
Yeah. So that's kind of.
Doesn't matter how manly you are, being a DM will break you.
That was my first thing, and it was just, I don't know. The game was basically like you're all on this island. You can't remember where you
Why
came
you're
from
there,
or
how
how
you
you got there, and we just sort of did our thing on there. But at some point, that kind of dropped off for me because like life happened. I think I stayed with that game for like a couple of years, and then I had to go. And then it's a good gap of time between.
Funny story about the island actually. I was just on that page to see like what it looks like today, like 4 or 5 days ago. It actually ended shortly after fifth edition came out, so I'm curious if that had anything to do with it.
I don't know. I'd have to ask Charmander.
No way for me to find out because nobody's around on that site anymore. Last post was like
I still have
September 2014.
I still have Charmander on Steam. I could ask Charmander, but
hit him up and be like, "So whatever did happen to the island?"
There was a good gap of time. I can't say that I know how many years it was, but once I started my job as a security guard, one of my coworkers there was like, "Bro, have you ever played D&D?" And I was like, "I mean, yeah, kinda. I've played a little bit on a forum." But he was a massive D&D nerd. He introduced me to 5th edition and Critical Role and all that goodness, and got me into like a bunch of other forum games and stuff. And that was really when I started really getting into D&D. And that's, I discovered like, because of Critical Role, I discovered stuff like Acquisitions Incorporated and the Adventure Zone, stuff like that. Other shows for D&D.
The Ox Ventures.
The Ox Ventures, yeah.
Oh man, the Ox Ventures is really fucking good.
The Yogscast has one. I think it's Yog Ventures. I don't know. But basically,
See, now I feel like I'm going back to my theater nerd roots because you guys are talking about all these D&D podcasts, and I'm like, well, when I was getting ready to DM, I was like, everybody online says that Matt Mercer is the greatest DM ever, so I'll watch that. I'll watch Critical Role and just take notes on how Matt DMs.
I was gonna
really
say
watch
actually
the
what I hear is
entertainment
the
out of you.
opposite, where it's like, will DMs please stop trying to copy Matt Mercer? This is not how the
Uh-huh.
game is played. Fuck
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
off."
I got a lot of that too, where it was like people being like, "Why can't you DM more like Matt Mercer?" And it was like the whole Mercer effect thing. But I was like, "What?" There was this level of like, no
Because
matter
I'm
how
not
much
fucking Matt
people,
Mercer.
yeah, no matter how much people hated being compared to or turning around and be like, "Well, why can't you act like the cast of Critical Role? Like your role play sucks. Your battle decisions are terrible." Stuff like that. No matter how much that was, there was always this overarching like, it's not Matt's fault. Matt is a really good DM. So I was like, okay, well, let me go watch the Matt show and just take notes on how
The
Matt
Matt
DMs.
Show.
I mean, he is a good DM, but even he is he's gone on
let me
record
just go
and
watch the Matt show.
even he's gone on record and said, "Please don't be yelling at your DMs to be more like me. That's some bullshit. Don't do it."
I mean, it
Yeah,
is
He
though.
put out
It
it's like
really
he
is.
put out a
though.
Like you're
series
demanding that
called
somebody
DM Tips.
like lose their
DM
individuality
Tips, I think.
for the sake of your enjoyment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every
So
DM
we're
is
all
You're gonna
different.
hallucinating
DM how you're
together.
gonna
So
DM.
deal with it.
Mhm.
Oh man, one of the things I thought was the coolest thing. It was one of the moments when I was like, I have to admit, Mercer's really cool just as a person. Was when Joe Cat managed to get him to come on for his crap guide to being a dungeon master.
Well, that's the
Mhm.
other thing is now that I've watched a good chunk of the show, um, what I'm getting from like the community that's going off on the side there, and from some of the others that I've looked into, like, well, what is he like in his guest appearances, or watch some like the live stuff and seeing other people's like cell phone footage from cons and stuff. It's like he's one of those guys that just happened to have. See, he was like, he's a voice actor, and that doesn't make you incredibly public. Like unless you're in a very specific, hyper popular thing, which Critical Role ended up being that specific, hyper popular thing. So he sort of just had celebrity thrust upon him, but he's still just like, I go home and I look in the mirror and I just see a dude.
Yeah. Now, Zeta, if you want to, actually, I'm going to recommend this to you. If you want to see the way that a DM rolls when the players are not necessarily doing what the DM says, so it's, I'll put it this way. A similar but much different version of DMing from Matt Mercer. Go watch the Adventure Zone and just watch how Griffin McElroy DMs a crowd of hooligans, because
Unruly.
Yeah, that keeps coming up on Critical Role is like, oh, go watch Adventure Zone. I'm like, but I'm taking notes on Matt.
I recommend also take notes on Griffin, because he's he's a
I've
little
also
out there.
taken notes.
So Matt is
There's-
super nice.
There's a bunch
Griffin
of
is-
other YouTube
Griffin is
content
like-
creators that are putting streams out there.
God,
So I've
how
been
would you
taking
even
notes
describe it? Like,
on, like,
it's
20
not that he's an
different GMs.
asshole, but Griffin very much has a level of, I see that you have decided to engage in more than a mild level of tomfoolery. Here is my
Yeah.
ban.
Hang on,
So
hang on. Is that the guy? Is that the guy who like? It would. You can just look it up.
So my
Actually,
favorite
and,
my
and see
favorite
if that's
example of
the guy.
something that he's done, right, is he's DMing a game and the players are they're in like a casino, I guess, and they're supposed to sneak past the security window, right? So the other two characters, I don't know what their classes are, but one of them sneaks by, one of them barely sneaks by, and the third guy goes, "All right, I'm going to cast Swarm of Insects." and and the other two are like, "Don't do that, don't, that's gonna give us away, don't do that." And they like start to talk him down, and the Griffin, who's the DM, goes, no, he said he's gonna cast Swarm of Insects, I just want to see how this goes. He goes,
So
"Go
it's
on,
not who
tell
I
me,
thought it was.
tell me how
It's not
casting
who I
Swarm
thought
of
it was, but I
Insects is
looked
gonna
it up,
help you."
and the first thing that comes up is a drawn picture of him by a fan, and he's wearing a shirt that just says "Please don't."
Yeah,
Yeah, sounds about right for him.
yeah, he's goofy, but his method of DMing is fantastic, in my opinion.
He's really good. So how did he explain his idea that the
Well,
insect swarm would help?
he was like, "Well, if I cast Insect Swarm, I can block the window so they can't see us walking by."
Oh, okay.
And
The guy I'm
nobody
thinking
would
of is from
suspect that
Dimension
an
20.
Yeah,
insect
yeah.
swarm.
Griffin is like, "Okay, so you cast Swarm of Insects and you put it over the window, and you alert every single guard in the room." Who are now dealing with a swarm of insects on their window, and they're freaking out, calling people, going, "What the fuck is going on out there?" It's a great show. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, no, the guy I was thinking of is from Dimension 20.
Mm.
I've heard of that one, but I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I don't know much about that one either.
I was exposed to Dimension 20 by a recommended video on YouTube, where he and Matt Mercer are talking about why Harry Potter makes no sense. And I have to say, just this, because I've watched the full video, but this particular 60 seconds is like everything that I thought was wrong with Harry Potter.
Oh,
I'm gonna actually play about like 5 seconds of it. So this is from Dimension 20 Shorts. It does not belong to us. It was an interview. What is this gentleman's name? Oh, it was on Dimension 20, guest starring Matt Mercer.
You got a civilization of wizards who can teleport at will, and they have their mail delivered by nature's slowest bird? That's fucking animal cruelty.
Yeah, that's all I'm gonna play. But yeah, that was the first clip of this guy I ever heard, and I'm like, you have my attention.
Also, I just remembered the Yogscast one is called High Rollers, and it's DM by
That sounds like
Mark Humes, and it's also really good.
All right, I gotta step away for a minute because I gotta make a call. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
my only real experience with D&D is I played a little bit on the island, and then I did a little bit on It Sucks to Be Earth, and that was it. And
Yes.
I found it not as enjoyable as you guys seem to.
Yeah, given those two things, probably not.
It makes sense that you wouldn't enjoy it as much from
Oh,
that
man.
exposure.
Yeah, Sucks to Be Earth. That's a game I was writing.
Yeah.
Still am, actually, but I've
Yeah,
renamed
it kind
it
of
now.
abruptly like stopped.
I say, didn't you change the name for that? 'Cause, like, I
I've
saw
changed it. Yeah,
change
I
in my
changed it
feed.
from Sucks to Be Earth to Ultimate Apocalypse. Although I'm considering changing it again to Apocalypse Unlimited. I don't know.
Yeah, get some get some mileage out of the Xandria Unlimited shit. One thing I wanted to talk about that I think
You know what? I didn't even think about that. I was thinking of like Justice League Unlimited, but like, yeah, okay. Maybe I won't now.
I mean, if you do it, it's not necessarily gonna be hated, but it might be popular because it's not.
It's a long ways from ready to play.
That's true.
But I'm like building it off
but
of
one thing I wanted
5th
to talk
edition,
about that I thought was
so.
interesting.
Hmm.
So, and I was hoping that this would be a subject that Ringo could actually speak on, because I was talking to him about this a little bit last night, which was that like there are mythological things, creatures, beings, etc. within World of Warcraft. We're not quite that nerdy. Within the realm of Dungeons and Dragons that don't necessarily line up with normal depictions thereof, if that makes sense. So for example, vampires. The only show I know of that gets close to that gets even like close to D&D vampires is True Blood. Because the way D&D vampires work is there are only two ways to become a true vampire. And way number one is you have to get bit by a vampire, drained of your blood, buried, buried on the grounds of the vampire's castle or lair or whatever, and then you will be raised as a what do they call it? A vampire spawn. And the only way to become a true vampire after that is to kill the guy who spawned you. The only other way to
A lot
become a
better.
true, genuine vampire is you have to be kissed by a succubus that genuinely loves you.
Yeah, that's so much more like badass.
Now that second one doesn't exist in True Blood, but the first one does. But yeah, the idea that you would be able to convince a succubus to genuinely love you does sound really cool, but also, like I feel like on account of like hentai garbage, succubuses have been kind of considered just like, oh, they're just this poor pseudo vampire class of beings that require semen to survive. Like in World of Warcraft, I keep doing that. In Dungeons and Dragons, no, they are horrifying demon creatures.
Yeah, they like feed on dreams or something.
No, they don't. What they do is the way that they get people to like what's the word I'm looking for? The way that they fuck with people is basically that what's the word I'm looking for? They will get you to commit 3 acts that are so against your being. And on the third act after you do it, they kiss you and they steal your soul, basically. It's just so we're clear, those 3 acts could be 3 sexual acts, but they're not always.
Well, if sexual acts are not against your nature, then it wouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
so if you're a bard, then you're probably
Yeah, if you're a bard, it's not going to be that at all.
Yeah.
That's the
Probably
stereotype, by the way. Not all bards are like that.
I said roll, or I said slay the dragon, not lay the dragon.
That is a whole series in and of itself, and it's just called it's called like Elwyn Fantasy: The Bard. Or Elfwood or something like that.
Elfwood.
Yeah,
I don't
I don't
remember
know.
for sure what it's.
I don't know.
It's a series on what do they call it? The art site no one talks about anymore.
DeviantArt?
DeviantArt. Oh, good
Or
lord.
they only talk about it to make fun of it.
Did y'all know two things. First of all, did y'all know Jeff Goldblum is doing a D&D game?
I did not.
I did not know that. No.
Yeah, man. I don't know nothing about it. Other
That's
than
great.
Jeff Goldblum doing a D&D. The other thing is, did you know they're making a D&D movie?
Oh dear lord, that could only go.
I mean, they already
horribly.
have a D&D movie.
No, they're
It's
making
it's
they're making a redo.
Yeah, I feel like that's only gonna go terribly.
2023.
2023, more like I don't want to be alive.
It's got Chris Pine. It's
Oh
got
boy,
Michelle Rodriguez.
I don't know who that is.
I'm gonna guess Dave doesn't know who that is either.
I think she's that chick that shows up in a lot of sci-fi movies, isn't she?
She's well
What,
known
like
for
the girl that was the main
her-
character in Monster Hunter? No, I don't think so.
No,
If that's who you're
she's
talking
I'm
about.
back. What are we talking about?
she's from the Fast and Furious series.
Michelle
Oh,
Rodriguez?
Yeah, Michelle Rodriguez. Yeah, I'm talking about the D&D movie
Yeah, she's like that
with,
stereotypical ass-kicking girl.
with Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez and
okay, it's not
Hugh
gonna be in here.
Grant. Hugh Grant.
Huge ant is actually how you say that.
It's
I
Hugh
have so
Grant.
many fucking physical Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Like, hold on.
So you said Michelle Rodriguez is going to be playing in the new
Where
D&D
did that
movie?
come from? What prompted that
What
statement?
prompted?
That's what I want to know.
He probably
Yeah, my
he's got
camera here.
ADHD, so he probably just
Look
saw.
at my camera here. I've been opening digital packs. But what is this?
You've been playing
Oh
with the
my
pack opener I
God.
showed you the other day.
You have just
This whole
all
box has
cards.
Yu-Gi-Oh cards in it too.
And yet, for some reason, you think that D&D is below you.
I don't play it as much as I used to, but I am remembering how fun it used to be before they
There's
changed the rules.
so many cards. I'm not
Yeah.
even looking at the box, the background.
Okay, this is.
It hurts my
I just-
soul
I
to
just
just look at the
hear
amount of
the
money that has
Pure
been spent
disappointment
Oh
to
no!
accumulate
in
those
this
cards.
shit-
his voice right
Most
now.
of this I got for free. The majority
Yeah,
of it
but
I
like
got
the
for
sheer
free.
amount of money that has been spent to accumulate that pile of cards doesn't
Mhm.
intrinsically mean you spent it, but somebody spent it. And so
Instead,
somebody
there's
paid for the
there's a
fucking
numeric
money.
value on that pile that is way the fuck too high.
Somebody
See,
spent that
instead
money,
of
but it wasn't me.
instead of doing that, I prefer to spend hella money on lightsabers
Look at how full that
instead.
is. Look at how full that is. They're all like that.
It hurts my soul.
But he won't play D&D.
I've got another tin here that
So
doesn't have a
we
lid
were
on it.
also
and it's full of
talking about
sleeve.
how like D&D has some different sort of mythological creatures and such that they don't operate like they do in most
Also full of
versions of
sleeve.
media.
Yeah, like
It's like in most versions,
Frost
the
Giant.
big one that I showed was vampire, which is
Goblin.
in most media it's just you get bit by a vampire, you become a vampire. But
Actually,
in
yeah, I suppose in most media it's been simplified to you get bit, you get it.
It's like an STD.
however,
In Vikings.
Vampirism is like an STD.
in
In some
what are they
versions, it
called?
is an STD.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Skyrim.
like in Blade, for example, it's an STD.
Yeah,
and
it's an
in
STD in
Skyrim,
Um,
it's an
I think
STD.
it's an STD in Van Helsing too, the movie with Hugh Jackman.
Sinfully
automatic crossbow.
transmitted disease.
Yes, a
There you
sinfully
go.
transmitted disease.
I have some Naruto trading cards as well.
Why?
What the fuck, bro?
I didn't even know there was a Naruto trading card game.
I didn't either until I got these. I think I only have the 3. Oh no, there's 4. Never mind. I don't know why I have these. Don't ask. Because you're not going to get an answer. I need to organize this shit better because my Dino Mist deck is all over the place.
So, are we gonna like get on with the show, or are we all just gonna keep staring in awe at the sheer cringy amount of Yu-Gi-Oh cards?
I forget that
gonna
we're not
say,
recording
like,
cameras.
we started like I started talking about something and then he just like super interrupted it.
Well, I mean that kind of happens all over this show. There's a lot of talking over the top of people.
I also
What were you
mentioned that Jeff Goldblum has a D&D show. I don't know if you knew about that, Zeta.
Well, no. Jeff
but I
Goldblum
was
does not
saying-
have a D&D show. Jeff Goldblum is on somebody else's D&D show.
Yes.
D&D show is called Dark Dice. I haven't watched it. I just happen to follow Jeff Goldblum, so I know what he's up to.
Dark Dice.
I was saying that like a lot of the mythological creatures aren't like they are always depicted in media, and to that end, I was using vampire as an example. The only media I know of that gets close to this is True Blood, and it's the fact that that vampires, to make more vampires, what they do is they bite you. They have to drain you of blood, and then after that, they have to bury you like on their
Is
property.
that a fucking Ninjago card?
Yeah.
Proceed, Dave.
I have some Skylander cards too. Like they're usually.
And then the only
just-
other way to become a vampire, a true vampire, is that you have to get a succubus to fall in love with you. And when she kisses you, when she falls in love with you, you will transform into a true Nosferatu.
as opposed to having your
As
soul
opposed
sucked
to
out.
like, yeah, basically.
Look, it's not the worst way
Also,
to go.
I mentioned that right now media tends to treat succubus like a cute pseudo vampire creature that requires semen in order to survive. In D&D, that is not the case. It is a horrifying demonic creature that sucks the souls out of anything it can.
I mean, yeah.
And the way that they do it is they get you to commit 3 betrayals of your character. And then after you commit these betrayals of character...
Bend the fuck out of that.
Which, may I add, because I had to step away for a second, so I don't know if you already said this, but that's a thing that's drawn straight out of the Catholic Church. The whole 3 betrayals of your character thing. That comes directly from the Catholic Church's lesson about when the Apostle Peter denies Christ, or rather, he was the disciple at the time. The disciple Peter denies Christ 3 times.
Yeah.
Because vampires have a very anti-Christ imagery. So, of course, they got to do that.
Well, I mean, and this isn't vampires, they're succubus, which is different, but they are related.
No, but like the comparison, because to be a vampire, you got to commit these 3 trails of character.
No, to be a vampire, to be a regular vampire, you just have to get bit by a vampire. But to be a true Nosferatu, like a vampire lord, essentially, you have to not commit the 3 betrayals of character.
Now,
you
hang
have
on
to
a
get
minute.
the succubus to fall in love with you.
Now, hang on a minute. That's not what you said earlier. You said, well, to become a true vampire, you gotta be bit, then you gotta be dead, then you gotta be buried in the vampire's castle and resurrected 3 days later on the twilight moon.
Hold on.
And then you
to
gotta
become
go.
A vampire
you gotta
spawn,
become a vampire hunter and go kill the vampire that
I was gonna say, okay, so you can't become a true vampire if you kill the vampire that made you. But that's very tough because the vampire that made you can basically command you to do anything, and then you shit out of luck, you have to do it because he made you. So it's very difficult for a vampire. What do they call it? A vampire spawn. That's the word I'm looking for. It's very difficult for a vampire spawn to actually successfully kill its vampire parent, for lack of a better term.
Sire, I believe the term is.
Yeah, that would probably be a better term. But yeah, it's very difficult to do that. It's also very difficult to be in a position where succubus falls in love with you. So becoming a true vampire is not easy.
Look, all you gotta
By
do to get
any
a succubus to
circumstance.
fall in love with you is be a pure, unadulterated badass.
Well,
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
Slayer.
the
Yeah.
argument is that since succubus are so evil, because the succubus are not demons well, maybe they are. I can't remember. They're either demons or they're devils, and there's a difference between demons and devils. That's actually a thing in D&D.
I believe succubi
Devils,
are demons, but they might just be like miscellaneous.
they have a fallen angel backstory. I know that.
That's the Enrius.
No, the succubus also have a fallen angel backstory. They're fallen love angels. Both of those have, and I think this because one of them became devils and one of them became demons.
I believe that would make the succubus demons then. 5e succubus.
So the thing is, in D&D, devils are lawful evil.
It is actually not considered a devil or a demon. It is a neutral fiend.
Oh, is it? Interesting. I didn't know that.
So it's like a Yugoloth. It's somewhere in the middle. It's still a fiend, but it's not a demon or a devil.
So the devils are lawful evil, meaning they do in fact have a sense of law, and they do in fact have a sense of
Yeah, it says the
Order of-
lascivious, dark-winged fiends can be found in service to devils, demons, night hags, Rakshasas, and Yugoloths. Asmodeus, the ruler of the nine hells, uses these fiends to tempt mortals to perform evil acts.
Rakshasas are so cool, dude.
The Rakshasas are kind of baller devils, yeah.
They're dope.
I was gonna say
like-
they're based off of real. Those are also based off of real.
Yeah, they're also based off of a real demon, I believe, from Hindi mythology. I
I was
could
gonna
be
say, they're
wrong.
like
They
Indian
also
mythology or
have the
something.
most like you thought it was your brother, but it was me, Dio.
Yeah, that's true. That is.
They have,
Yeah.
they have big
Yeah,
Dio
Dio
energy.
is definitely a Rakshasa.
Oh my god. They're great. I mean, they're fucking terrible, but they're great.
They're great villains.
Yes, they're wonderful villains.
Rakshasas are basically, they look like humanoid tigers, but their hands are backwards,
Mm-hmm.
and that might
But-
be a bit weird for you to like picture in your head. But what I mean is like,
Luckily,
if you hold your
Google
if you hold your hands out in front of you right now, they are facing each other, like their palms are facing each other. A Rakshasa's hands would have the palms facing away from each other.
Yeah. They can also shapeshift.
Yes, they are very shapeshifty, which is what makes them very difficult to track down when they're
Yeah.
the actual problem.
That's what makes them very big Dio energy.
Yeah,
Dio
big
energy.
Dio energy for sure.
Because they have a penchant for revealing themselves dramatically. Like,
That's
yeah.
true, actually. That's actually written in the monster manual. That's
Yeah,
accurate.
they have a penchant for revealing themselves dramatically. They're evil theater nerds.
They're
with
basically
money.
Dio, and it's wonderful.
They're fun. I like another thing I really like is people like they talk about dragons a lot because it's called Dungeons and Dragons. But like the main true villains of the universe aren't the dragons. They're the devils and the demons.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
dragons are like
archdevils.
And
this
there's like a whole
ancient
cosmic
force of-
war.
The dragons are like this ancient force of like, oh, if you see a
But
dragon, you better
there's
fucking
also
run.
so much more interesting stuff in there. So like for example, Dungeons and Dragons has gods in it and pantheons, obviously, right? And there's a type of enemy called an aboleth that hates the gods
Yes, aboleths.
because the aboleth have genetic memory like the gold from SG1, and they can remember a time when their progenitor existed before the gods, and they had an empire before the gods, and they feel that the gods came in and took everything good from them, and so they they basically hate the gods for doing that to them.
Oh no, my
And
sleeve.
their ultimate goal is to kill all the gods so that they can have their empire back. And that's like such a cool concept to me. I think there's a lot
I
of
like
shit
that.
like that just flies under the radar because dragons.
Yeah, and then
Because dragons. Yeah,
and
you
then
know, they're not sort of an immediate existential threat to the mortal races like dragons are. So
there's mind flayers, which a lot of people go like, oh, tentacles. But did you know mind flayers have a fucking hive mind?
What?
Yeah,
yes, the
Yeah,
called
elder
Mother Brain or
brain.
something.
yeah,
Elder Brain, yeah.
and they're actually really fucking cool monsters. Like,
They also had a huge fucking empire, and then the Gith, who were their slaves at
Yeah,
the
they're
time,
apparently from
rebelled.
like way in the future or something. There's like a lot of lore for all these creatures, but like as a player, I've never really delved into the lore because we just kill them. Like, hey, you're hostile. Eat
I like
mace.
to know the lore because I like to be able to ask the question like, how much does my character know about these things?
It's
And
just a
then,
question.
if they're like, if I roll really well, I might be able to get told like, oh, you know a lot, and then I could be like, okay, cool, I know a lot in real life, so I'll just use that.
Lore
Um,
master.
good old
Here I
lore
am,
master.
just sort of
that's
glossing
true.
over
I
it,
really fucking love lore.
forgetting
I like
getting
lore
the
for
lore
any game,
master.
video
Glory
games,
and
whatever.
Diana.
Like that's my thing. Like my online name is Lore Master
So
Leonis for a reason.
here's a question, and it's probably not anything any of you are gonna agree with. But here's a question: what if, like, from his current lack of knowledge of D&D, we were just like, all right, Ringo, you're gonna DM a game now.
That sounds
Go
amazing.
fantastically.
Good fucking luck.
It would go fantastically. I have absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever.
I think it depends on his player set. Like if it's us and we know he's doing it this way, I don't think that would be a problem. But if it was like
I'm
if you also
assuming
randomize the players,
I'm assuming it would be the three of us, and then he would be the DM. I'm curious which one of us. Well, actually, that's not even a good question. That's a dumb question. I was gonna say which one of us would make the best DM, but it's really best is kind of subjective.
It's subjective, yeah.
Hey, so I'm gonna actually have to drop out of the show for a couple minutes because my windshield changer guy got here like at 11:30, and we were told, yeah, they can show up anytime between 11:30 and 4:30. So I was thinking it was gonna be like 2 or 3.
Okay.
All right, so I'll still
Okay,
stay
okay.
here, but I'm gonna be muted. I'm gonna have the TV muted, so
Okay. Have fun.
basically I'm out.
Have fun storming the
All right,
castle. Yeah, man. I tell you what, it's so
Okay,
as I mentioned earlier, I've been building a game called. It started out being called It Sucks to Be Earth, but it's called Ultimate Apocalypse now. I almost said Apocalypse Unlimited. It's called Ultimate Apocalypse now, and it's like
just call it Apocalypse Unlimited. No one's going to be mad at you.
it's a post-apocalypse game that I took heavy inspiration from Fallout, and I'm actually kind of thinking I might want to play Wasteland 3 and kind of see what's going on there, see if I can get some ideas from that as well. But it's been a little bit tricky to do because it's based in 5e, but like there's some things that you have to consider, like most of the fantasy monsters from D&D probably aren't going to be there. I could maybe make a few of them where it's like, oh, some creature mutated in a way and now you have this thing, but it's not the traditional
fucking
whatever.
goblins.
Yeah, maybe. And then I have a set of creatures like I have your regular. I've focused a lot on zombies because zombie apocalypse is a big part of it. But I've had like your regular zombies, and then I have zombies that are elementally charged, so they can do they could do fire damage when they hit you or something like that. And
Well, I
building
remember
those,
there was like an alien species and
there is, yeah,
uh,
there's so hey, can I just
the
talk about this
Wicker.
for? Can I talk about this for a few minutes?
It's
'Cause, like,
it's a D&D game you're trying to create. So yeah, go
yeah,
for it.
so I've got like again the races, and this is one of the reasons why it's kind of difficult. It's because unlike with D&D where it's like you have all this, I'm sort of limiting the scope because it's in a certain world, it's in a specific place. Um, but like so the races, obviously you have your regular humans, and then I made I made a race of aliens that I called them the Warlocks. Um, and then as I've evolved the game in my head and on paper, I've changed it so that Warlock is just a slang term that humans have for them, but their actual name is the Saran. Um, but they're more technologically advanced, but they're physically weaker than humans. But they can also shapeshift. So essentially, I just used Changeling as a base for that. But I tweaked a few things, and then I have androids, which you can't really tell that they're not people, unless you
So like Terminator level androids.
yeah, unless you specifically you destroy enough to see what's going on underneath or whatever. And I used Warforge as a base for that. But I tweaked it a little, and then I've got
Not a bad base for a machine race.
I mean, considering it is a machine race, yeah. I have a group called the Wicker, which is essentially living mannequins. And there's variations on that as well. And I forget what I used for them as I forget what I used as a base. I may have just done my own thing with that and not used anything as a base. And then I also have angels and demons and a race called alphas, which is supposed to be the original race that every other race is from.
Interesting. That sounds like it came out of like a webtoon or something. That sounds really familiar.
Alphas? You know,
The term alphas.
here's the
Sounds
interesting
familiar.
thing. If I tell you the basis of where that came from, you're gonna be confused. But
But now I want to know.
Well, essentially, I based it off of the Devourer from Adventure Quest.
And how did you?
How did I come to that conclusion?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
So
Like,
initially,
what about the Devourer?
I had,
You're gonna have to explain that
and
character probably.
I still
now.
kind of have several phases set up, like story arcs set up where it's like, okay, this is gonna happen here, this is gonna happen here. One of those, I think it's the last one now. It may not have been the last one originally. Was basically essentially a Devourer type creature was gonna show up, and the players would have to fend it off. And it would be they'd have to be really high level at this point, but they'd have to basically destroy the Devourer and save the world. And then I thought to myself, well, what if it's not a big creature? What if it's a ship? Because I've already got aliens. Fuck it, why not? What if it's a ship? And then it was like, well, who would be piloting that ship? Who would have interest in, coming to Earth and destroying it? And then I was like, well, what if I just had these pompous assholes that's like, oh, well, this experiment failed. Time to nuke it, basically. And that's what I ended up at, where it was like the alphas are the original race, and essentially Earth was a sort of an experiment or a test zone for humans. They were like, all right, let's see what happens if we take this genetic makeup and make this creature, and then let's just see where it goes. And they're coming back to check on it, basically, and then they see how fucked the world is, and they're like, well, these guys have just fucked up. Let's just get rid of them and start over. And
Interesting.
it's gonna be they're gonna have to face off against the alphas at the end. But it's
That sounds
it's
like that's
coming
not a player
together.
race then.
There is actually a player race I have set up for that, although I may get rid of it. But there are a few. The only reason I did that is because there's a few NPCs as well. But I might just keep it at the NPCs. And then, of course, I have a whole other thing that I've thrown in there for mutation, where, like, because it's, the apocalypse.
Well, we should, speaking of that, I feel like, and I don't know if you kept the same backstory, but can I briefly explain, like, why it was called It Sucks to Be Earth and all that?
Yeah.
So his backstory for this was that what happened, I believe the zombie apocalypse started first, right? That's where it all started?
No.
No.
No. It started with the Saran.
Oh, you're right. All right, so an alien species came to Earth, and I don't remember if it was the original version. Some version of that was like they were refugees, and Earth refused to let them live there. I don't remember if that was the original version of it or if they came as invaders initially.
It's kind of both.
Okay, so
essentially
they came to Earth.
Essentially, their planet
happened.
ran out. Essentially, their planet ran out of room. So they were running around looking for habitable planets. They found Earth, and then they just sort of slipped in there and started trying to take over covertly without the Earth people knowing.
But they got found out.
They got found out pretty early on in their operation.
I do actually recall. So the zombie virus was made as an anti-warlock virus, and I recall that in the original version of the game, if a warlock got infected with that virus, they didn't become a zombie; they just died because it was designed to kill them. But as a side effect, it also zombified humans.
Yeah.
And so to get rid of all the zombies, the U.S. government decided to just pop a nuke, which happened to hit an ancient seal that had kept the demons out of the prime material realm for a long time. And now you're dealing with that problem. And then somewhere in all of that, the Wicker showed up.
Hence, it sucks to be Earth.
I wanted it to be the most ridiculous thing I could think of. Because I was like, what's like the worst apocalypse possible? What if we just did everything? Fuck it.
Just everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
And then you had what's his name and his corruption people.
Yeah, that's not really a thing in the current version.
I know, because he was an asshole and nobody liked him. Because he's like the most toxic type of DM. Is he basically would force people to become something they didn't want to be.
Yeah.
He wouldn't give them a choice. He'd just be like, "Well, this is here now, and you're part
you
of it.
either join me or you die." Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very thinly veiled play the game the way I want you to, or fuck off.
Yeah.
And the only reason he didn't absolutely get away with that is because he wasn't the only DM.
And see, so now in the current version, I have a whole set of like powers that you can get for being a mutant. Sort of X-Men style a little bit, but in ways it's like, so not every mutation is good. Some of them it's like, okay, well, you've grown an extra hand.
Oh yeah, there's like a whole fucking table of them, and some of them are like really cool, and you want those mutations, and some of them are like, I really don't want this mutation. Like, your stomach acid is now chlorine or some shit like that. I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, or it's like everything tastes like grape soda. Everything tastes like grape soda.
Yeah, that's one too. And then there's
Yeah,
other ones that are
or
just sort of meh. Like they might be useful, but they're also just like not that high profile.
and then there's stuff
Um,
like you can shoot lasers out of your eyes.
yeah. Or
Um,
you can do a little
and
like minor shape shifting.
it's a little tricky
Hey, I'm
to.
back.
Hi, we're talking
Oh.
about Sucks to Be Earth.
Yeah.
It's a little
Hang on.
tricky to
Give me
find.
like a 3-second pause of no sound so Steve knows to edit this out.
So was there anything else? Because I kind of wouldn't mind geeking out about some of the lore that I've learned about D&D over time.
I think my favorite part about D&D lore is how Tiamat just can't catch a fucking break. Like at one point she was a god,
That
and
is
then she wasn't a
accurate. That
god,
is accurate as fuck.
and then she was an archdevil, and then she got replaced by a very aggressive lesbian, which is the Enrius Zariel. She's now the
Wait, you're gonna have
archdevil
to
of.
explain that one to me. I was not
So
aware of that part of the story.
there was an art. So she was basically a solar, more or less, like mechanically speaking. Her name is Zariel. She was like the angel of war,
Yes,
basically.
I know
So
who
she
Zariel
fell
is.
and became an Enrius. She's like the Enrius. When Tiamat first became a devil, she was Asmodeus made her the ruler of the first layer of hell, Avernus. That is now her prison. She's also the warden of the first layer of hell, but she can't leave. And
That bit
she
I
no
knew. I
longer
just
has
didn't realize
dragon.
Zariel had anything to do with it.
Well, Zariel is now the archdevil of the first layer of hell because Asmodeus is a backstabbing asshole, which anybody who goes into business with Asmodeus should know ahead of time. But like, she went from being a goddess to just a really powerful dragon to an archdevil to imprisoned in the nine hells.
Yeah. Suck, man.
Well, to be
Yeah.
fair, she's an
The
evil
lore
bitch.
of Dungeons
So.
and Dragons is just Tiamat just can't catch a fucking break. Also, Helm is like the ultimate Chad. He is the divine Chad. There's at one
Helm's
point in one
one
of
of
the
the
books,
gods, isn't he?
huh?
Helm's one of the gods, isn't he?
Yeah, Helm is one of the greater deities, so he's one of the most powerful. He stands at the bottom of the steps to Ao. So, for any of our listeners, you have demigods, lesser gods, and greater gods, and then you have Ao, who is called the overgod. And he's like, imagine what a mortal sees when they look at a god. That's what a god sees when they look at Ao. Ao is the god of gods. He is the Almighty. He's the Abrahamic God. He's that concept of like a monotheistic super deity.
Well, if I recall correctly, the
And
idea is that Ao is somewhat a.
he's originally there was lore that Ao answers to something called the luminous entity, which is alluded to be the DM. Now it's just alluded that Ao is the DM.
I was gonna say I remember hearing somewhere that Ao is like a representation of the DM.
Yeah,
I was gonna say
they got rid of the whole luminous entity thing because it's a little too fourth wall.
I was gonna say
There's
Ao is
a couple other reasons stated.
Ao
But
is
Ao
three
essentially
kobolds
an
and a
allegory
toga.
for the DM. He's pretty cool. No, Ao would be like 300 billion kobolds in a toga.
Ah, yes, I'm
Um,
Ao.
The
but yeah,
truest
so
of
Helm,
true
there's in one
gods.
of the books, Mistra tries to force her way to Ao to demand, because he did something where he's like, y'all suck at being gods, be mortals for a while. But Mistra
Oh
still is
yeah.
like the most powerful magician ever because she's the goddess of magic. She can just die. Um, so she tries to get past, she tries to force her way past Helm, and Helm is basically like the god of being an awesome bouncer. He was just like, you ain't getting up in this club. And then so she tries to attack him, and he was like, bitch, did I stutter? And just straight deletes Mistra. So now we
So
have
Helm's like the only
Hecate.
god that got to stay a god when all the other gods.
Yeah, because he was the only one who was doing his job. That the whole thing of that arc is like all the gods they've all sort of
Lazy.
devolved into like bickering and infighting and sending armies of their mortals to kill armies of the other people's mortals because if less people are worshiping them, then it makes them less powerful, and they can like the gods in D&D are like
Bunch of assholes
slightly
by the sound of it.
cannibalistic in the sense of if I want part of your divine portfolio, all I have to do is make you weaker than me, and I can just come take it from you.
Yeah, I remember there was something about that whole event that was like, where AO was like, you know, I made you, you're my children, you're supposed to be brothers and sisters and care about each other. And instead you're just dickwads and assholes, and you don't even
Yeah,
take
you're
care of the
just
people who worship you,
he,
except to maintain that worship enough that you don't lose any power.
yeah.
And way back in the day, you
He's
didn't
like,
even
all
need to
you
be
seem to
nice to
care
your
about is
followers to do
power,
that.
not your
And
responsibility.
gods would make more lesser gods for the express purpose of making their power greater. And AO is just like, all right, so we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, he
If you
also was
want
like, nobody
power,
has the right to be a
from now
god unless I
on,
directly give consent.
from now on,
So
if you
I think the
want power
current,
as a god, you have to be really nice to your followers so that they will love you and adore you. Because the more they love
yeah,
you and adore
the,
you,
so
the more
the,
power you will have.
I think the current pantheon has at least two, maybe three, lesser deities that used to be mortals. That AO was like, yeah, you can be a god because you're better than what's there right now. And I think there's one greater deity who used to be mortal. Um,
Awesome.
It's really confusing the farther back you go, but I like cause they've never said that Tiamat and Bahamut aren't siblings, but it's confusing as to whether they happened or whether or if Asgarath the World Shaper is their parent, and Asgarath was one of Ao's like original weapons in the Dawn War. He's like the first and greatest dragon. And like he's the one who like physically built Abertoral,
Right,
like out of
Avatar,
blocks and stick. He
that
like
planet
put
that
planet.
totally everyone who has never played D&D
Yeah.
totally
So
knows what it is.
Abertoral is the planet that D&D universe like takes place on. However, it isn't Abertoral anymore. At some point, the elemental lords and the gods got into a war, which I think was the Dawn War, um, which was threatening the universe. So AO just goes, all right, hold up. How about this? You guys can have Aber. You guys can have Toro. And the elementals got Aber, and the gods got Toro. So now it takes place on Toro.
Yep, pretty much.
But yeah, AO is like my favorite fantastical over deity because there's over deities in several different medias where you have like the gods and then the gods answer to like a higher god. But usually they portray that like final god as like the biggest bad guy. Like in Supernatural, at the very final season, God's the bad guy for some reason because the writers just didn't know where else to take it, and power creep is a thing.
Also, they were leading up to it a bit. Because I
Kind
remember that
of.
there was seasons about like they faced off against Lucifer and they dealt with Gabriel, and there was a level of just like, this is shit that has happened over and over again, and this is just a
Yeah,
family spat from the point, like, that's a big deal that Gabriel made in that show was,
yeah, because I remember the
this is
whole
just a
line
family
of
spat
like
to me.
I remember the whole line of Lucifer being like, "Oh, so you're siding with Michael finally?" And Gabriel just goes, "No, I'm not siding with either of you. If he was here, I'd shiv him too. I've had enough." But yeah, there's been over deities, or like for instance in Dragonlance, the over deity is Chaos, but he's trapped inside a magical item called the Grey Gem. Chaos is not a good parent. Ao is a good parent. I like Ao because he's like, I don't deal with mortals because that's what the gods are for. Because if I were taking hands-on approach to this one planet in the universe, the entire universe is incredibly unbalanced. He's busy running everything, capital E, in the macro terms, which is what the gods are for, is to run the smaller shit. And when you talk about a god's divine portfolio as the smaller shit, like that sort of gives you an idea of the day-to-day office work of AO. So I like the lore that goes around him, but my favorite part is always the whole Tiamat cannot catch a break the game.
Yeah. I mean that's a thing. There's a number. I also like so if you know like the true lore behind Asmodeus, there's also a level of just like he just got royally fucked, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's part of the day-to-day office work of AO is handling Ahriman and Jazirian, who since they're part of the original, I think they're technically
For
elementals.
listeners who
I'm
don't
not-
know D&D lore, Asmodeus is the leader of Hell, of the nine
Well,
hells,
he's
and his
the
real
archdevil
name
of
is
archdevil.
Ahriman.
Yeah, which none of the archdevils know. Nobody in the multiverse but AO knows that he's Ahriman, and that Asmodeus is essentially an illusion, a puppet. Which also speaks to how powerful something like Ahriman or Jazirian is, that they can have um, basically, and Asmodeus, the puppet, has been a god before, and Ahriman is more powerful still, without
I
having to
mean,
worship
isn't
the same
Ahriman
way.
like a pre-deity creature?
Yeah, he's one of the things that's around the same age as like Asgarath or the Elemental Lords. He's like one of the building blocks of the universe is Ahriman and Jazirian. There's a few others like Asgarath, for instance, and there's a couple other Dawnward deities that are like some of the first consciousness of the universe that AO was like, surprise, you guys run things now because you're that piece of the universe manifested. So here's your responsibilities.
Good luck.
Yeah, basically.
Interesting. I didn't quite know that part. Um,
But
I
yeah, Asmodeus
was
is
AO around when the Aboleth Empire was around.
it. It depends on which
Knowledge
side of the
and a
fourth
little
wall you're
knowledge.
on and who you ask. I think that's a question for Sage Advice, which is the Coast Twitter. I forget the name of the gentleman, but he's the guy who's like the current like he's hired as the lore master. Um, in theater, what did we call that? Dramaturge. He's the dramaturge of D&D lore. So that would
What
be a
is, I
question
don't know
more.
that term. What is Dramaturge?
Okay, so when you make a period piece, like say the Netflix series The Last Kingdom about Uhtred of Bebbanburg, you, as part of your pre-production, you hire a dramaturge where you basically say, go find me all the historical information about Bebbanburg, Uhtred, everything that happened during that period of time. What did they dress like? What did they look like? How did they behave? What were their beliefs? What were the names of the cities? How distant were the cities? What were the ongoing political things? They give you the layout of the world. So the dramaturge's responsibility for something like Lin Manuel Miranda's Hamilton is to be like, this is what they wore. This is what fashion looked like at the time. This is how they spoke. This is where they lived. This is what buildings were made out of. And then that
Interesting.
is used for the rest of the pre-production team to go, okay, this is what the sets should look like. This is what the costumes should look like. This is how we should tell the actors to act. This is how this is the accents we should pick for the actors to use. Stuff like that. There's not usually a single dramaturge on massive things like Hamilton
Like Hamilton.
um, or like any really well selling Netflix show, especially if they were done overseas. But it's the dramaturgists are the historians. They're the theatrical historians. So I forget his name, but it's called Sage Advice, and it's considered official content. So like, hey, does this spell synergize with this spell? Does this ability synergize with that spell? Like a popular one that's some people allow it, some people don't, but it's been approved by Sage Advice. Is the Life Clerics um, it's their first ability. It's not Blessed Healer, but it's called something like that. It's like no, it's Disciple of Healing or Healing
Can
Disciple.
we
It's the
actually,
one
now
that
that you bring that up, should we not maybe cover classes a little bit? And
We can do that in a second because then that kind of will lead into that from this.
Well,
So
I
they
mean,
have an ability where it's like Disciple of Healing.
So we have been going for about
Also
2 hours.
Well, let me explain. Let me finish explaining Sage Advice, and then we can go.
Well,
from
they're
here.
speaking gibberish to me.
Well, it's because you haven't played the game. I'm sure if you explained some of the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh, I'd have the same reaction. Because all I remember is Dark Magician is edgy and cool, and Blue Eyes White Dragon is Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is the ultimate, except for Exodia, and neither of those are true anymore.
Not the case
Exodia.
anymore. That's so not the case anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, you'd start explaining to me like the current meta,
Exodia,
and I'd be like, bro,
small
what the fuck language are you
potatoes
speaking?
now.
Anyway, so
know the
talking to
fucking
our
current
listeners
meta.
again. So you have the Disciple of Healing ability for the Life Domain Cleric. What this means is when the cleric uses a spell that heals a party member or anybody else, they will add 2 plus the spell's level of healing just as bonus healing because that's what the class is for, is healing. So if this particular cleric has taken the Magic Initiate feat and has chosen from the Druid spell list the first level spell Goodberry, Sage Advice was asked, Goodberry heals 1 hit point. It is cast by a Life Cleric. It does healing. Does it synergize with Disciple of Healing and would therefore heal 4 points? Unless it was upcast. Sage Advice was, I want to say it's like something Crawford. I'll have to go look. But they ask him this question, and then he sort of confers with the rules and goes, yes, it synergizes. Now, obviously, there's some DMs who go, I don't like that. I'm not going to use that rule at my table. At which is like page 1 of the Dungeon Master's Guide basically says you can do that. But yeah, the official ruling. So if you were sitting at like an Adventure League table, which is like official content only, rules as worded, etc. Yeah, you can do that. So that's the Sage Advice. So I would say that what you were talking about before is a question for Sage Advice because I would not know if AO was canonically around Aboleths or pre-Aboleths, or if he was just like a consciousness that hadn't manifested his over deity
I'm
yet.
just curious because the Aboleth's backstory is that they existed before the gods, and when the gods showed up, they
Yes,
kind of
but
took everything.
we call
the
AO
Aboleths
the over
owned and made it
deity,
theirs.
but it's important mechanically speaking to recognize he's not a god. The 12th level spell Karthus' Avatar would not work on AO. AO is the classic sense of omnipotent. He's beyond what pagan religions conceive as a god. He's like an Abrahamic god. He's like totally outside of mortal comprehension. Magic is beneath him. So he's not a god in the sense that all the other gods are.
So he's not like a regular divine, is what you're
No.
telling me.
In fact, he has like divinity over divinity. It's his choice whether or not somebody gets to be a god.
I mean, I knew that bit.
I know that's like a big deal. It's a little bit to wrap your head around, because that's like, yeah, you sort of have to have the perfect being to be able to have that kind of responsibility.
Okay, so were we looking to wrap this up then? Is that where Beard is taking us?
I mean, we can keep going if you want. I'm just saying we've been going for 2 hours. We could do this all in a part 2.
It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to do a part 2 and cover things, because I feel like we just kind of like went off on stuff, and we didn't really explain gameplay mechanic wise what is D&D, how does it work, why you should be interested in it. We just kind of like went off on whatever things we were.
We just kind of
we
went
just
out
started talking about
history and lore.
Okay, well,
yeah.
ask those questions one by one, and I will give you a short answer for each of them.
What do you mean questions one by one?
Well, I mean, we already answered what is D&D, but like you said, like why should you play it, for instance?
Oh, well, why
Because
should
it is
you play
a
D&D?
fun because it is a fun social board game that you can use to explore questions and create meaningful memories with your friends. And by explore questions, I mean like ethics and philosophy questions. And you don't necessarily have to come to a consensus on it, but like it's fun to explore ethics. And it is a system by which you can explore ethics. That's how I convinced my church group to do it way back in the day. Was I was like, yeah, forget about all the demons and the satanic panic stuff. It is a system by which to explore ethics in real time without actually having to be in an ethically gray situation.
That is not a bad description of it.
Yeah.
There's
Subjective.
a lot. There's. It is subjective.
No,
Yeah.
ethics
Like,
is subjective by nature, but yes, it's a way to explore ethics. So you get like a high
well, that's
school
what I'm
kid who doesn't
saying. Like,
have a whole lot of ethics exposure.
he's saying it's
It-
subjective whether or not it's an
I
ethics.
said fun is subjective.
That's
Oh.
true.
Yeah, fun is subjective.
I don't find it as
because
enjoyable.
it's not for everybody. But as somebody who plays it, I feel it's my obligation to say it's a good game because I enjoy it. Hey, play this thing because it's good for you. Basically, if you don't want to play it, don't play it. I'm not going to make you play it. I'm not going to be like, haha, he don't play D&D. If you don't want to play it, don't play it. If it's not,
Even
for you,
though we literally did that all day to Ringo.
I know, but like, I don't play FIFA or NBA games.
Well, I
or,
don't
like,
fucking
legitimate
either. What the fuck?
But
do you
there's
think
a
I
lot
am?
of people out there who enjoy sport video games. I would rather just go play the sport.
True.
I'm not going to make fun of somebody for playing FIFA. I would just rather go play soccer myself.
I'll make fun of somebody for playing FIFA.
Okay, but that's you. So it's, again, it goes back to subjective, which is to come back around the point. The point is it's a subjective game of these experiences. And it's a great way to tell story and build a story collectively instead of just writing a book
I
yourself.
was gonna say, I think what I find more interesting about D&D is the fact that it's kind of like a collective story building effort.
Yeah.
And it's so like you have a
Because the
DM,
world
and the
interacting
DM's
with
job is
characters
basically to
interacting with the
build
world.
the universe that you're in, and that universe is the universe your characters explore. And as your characters explore it, your characters interacting with each other, and the DM coming up with like NPCs that you interact with and whatnot, becomes the story. And then
Yes.
that story continues to evolve.
So the core of improv acting is the concept yes and, which is also at the core of D&D. Yeah, of course, mechanically it's like, yeah, you rolled a 2 with a +7, so it's a 9, you don't hit him because his AC is 13. It's not yes and Puritan speaking, but it's yes and where it's you as a DM portray the world, the players portray the characters, and it becomes a world interacting with the characters interacting with the world.
Yes. And in that regard, it's brilliant. There's so many. You can even go on like you go on YouTube and there's people who aren't even necessarily D&D YouTubers might tell stories of when they played D&D, and you'll always hear people tell stories and they sound amazing. They sound like these epic fantasy adventures, and you'll get started in D&D and be like, this is boring. Like, I have to make a character sheet, I have to do this, I have to do all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where's my epic fantasy adventure? Well,
You
I
gotta
will
build up
say
to it, bud.
on
over
that one
time.
note, I will say on that one note, just to any of our listeners who are thinking like, oh, maybe I will, especially with 5th edition, it's really not that hard to make a character sheet.
It's
I taught my
really
wife
not.
how to do it in a day.
Yeah,
It's
not that
like
hard.
if you decide you want to play, you're going to get it. You'll be okay. It's not hard.
Unless you're me and you take like 6 hours to do a character
Well,
sheet.
that's not my fault. It's just
You're too obsessive
but
with shit.
you still got it, and you can play the game.
Yeah.
You
No,
didn't
I'm
reach
just-
a point
I'm
where
just
you're
a
like,
bit of an
this is too
obsessive
confusing. I'm
nerd,
not going to
so-
play this game anymore.
See, for me,
The
the
game
big
doesn't
holdup when I do a
itself.
character sheet is it's like, wisdom or intelligence? Is my character more smart or are they more wise?
I always pick wisdom because I always play clerics.
How
Listen,
about neither? Make your character a bumbling fucking moron with crazy amounts of strength.
Oh my god, Kevin has one of those in his
I've
journey.
done that too. I
He's
play a
just
lot of
like,
clerics and fighters. I play a lot of clerics
is
and
it,
fighters because Everybody likes to shit on clerics and fighters. So I'm
My-
like, yo,
my
these are
most-
some of the best classes in the
My
game.
most recent one was I made
Well,
a
that's why everyone shits
character.
on him, though. You
I
realize
made a
that, right?
character whose whole backstory is like, his wife died giving birth to his son, and his son had a rare disease and just passed away. But his son's last wish was, "Dad, go on an adventure for me." So he's just out in the world now. He's like boomer dad, having no idea what he's
John
doing.
Wick Make-A-Wish, the character.
Yeah, he's boomer dad, don't know what he's doing, but he's out here for an adventure.
I told my son I was gonna slay a dragon.
I'm here for a good time, not a long time. Let's get it, boys.
It's gonna be really interesting when that character becomes like the savior of the universe.
Yeah, and then like
Or one
you're gonna have that.
Yes.
Okay, to go back to that whole like it makes great memories. Then you're gonna have like the moment where the character like goes back and he's in the graveyard and he like puts his hand on the headstone and he's just like, "I did it, son."
I can't wait for the monument where they're like, "Oh, so and so the epic wizard, so and so the epic warrior, and Dad."
And Brian, he was here.
His name is his
And
name
Brian,
is his
he was
name
here.
is Raymond, shortened to Ray.
And Ray.
I was just trying to think of like what's a Home Depot name, Raymond,
and Raymond,
or like
Ray for sure.
Frank, or like Gregory, or George,
Did
or
you say
Ronald.
Drake?
No, I said
No, Greg.
Oh,
Greg.
Greg. I guess I just
Yeah.
didn't hear you right.
Or Fred, something like that. I was like Ray. Ray's the dad name.
So that's not your current character you're playing in
No,
Kevin's
no,
campaign,
that's just the next one I thought of and was like, oh, this would be a cool concept, and then I
Okay,
rolled up
well,
a character sheet.
we seem like we're almost done, and the windshield guys just told me they're done, so I gotta go pay the man. So
Yeah. So
talk
we've
to
been
y'all
going
later. Good
for
outfit.
2.5 hours. Yeah. So
All right, well.
I suppose
Well,
we
this has
should
been the
wrap up.
tutorial.
It's been the tutorial
this
on
concludes
D&D.
the tutorial.
If you learned something, please let us know what you learned in the comments.
We want to do.
If you learned
part
that
two
I'm a
next
dick,
week?
America's
then
best class.
you clearly haven't been paying attention.
Well, next
He's all
week
yelling,
would be
"Cleric
getting
is
run
better."
by Ringo technically. So I don't know if
Wait. Isn't
Maybe
it your
we'll have
turn?
an episode next week. All right, well, goodbye to all the listeners because I gotta peace out before the actual intro.
and
Intro.
with that, Zeta's gone. But
Isn't it your
yeah.
week? Wasn't D&D his idea, or am I just like,
No,
D&D?
it was.
My week.
huh?
Yeah.
But didn't we talk about Isekai last week, and that was David's week?
Yes, but the
But
problem
Zeta
is
Zeta got
Zeta
skipped.
was not present.
Yeah.
Zeta got skipped because he wasn't present.
So
And
anyway,
Zeta
well-
agreed that he is totally down for talking about D&D, so he'd accept that as pseudo. his
So I
choice.
have to come up with something else to talk about. Wonderful.
So
Alright,
what do you
cool.
want to talk about? Let's
I'll
say
have
it
to
before
think
we get
about it.
off.
I'll have to think about it because I really don't know.
okay, well we can talk about that off the
Wow,
podcast.
lame.
Anyway, say goodbye everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.